Thiel funded or founded companies have, since Vance was announced, have essentially signal that they're all in on the Trump Vance campaign. And this also includes Palmer Luckey as well, of the defense contractor Anduril, which is making a lot of unmanned drones and other, defense weapons. It's building our virtual border wall on the U.S.-Mexico border that Trump supports instead of a physical barrier that he used to campaign on. And they're also hugely involved in the Ukrainian conflict. So any sort of possibility of a second Trump administration winding down American aid to Ukraine, I think with Thiel in the equation, becomes questionable right away, because Anduril, Clearview, and Palantir itself intimately involved with the Ukrainian military as it relates to the conflict with Russia.
Well,
so anything that would see their contracts or their bottom line as it relates to their involvement in that conflict, I think it's unlikely that it would whittle down significantly if Thiel has the influence that is to be expected in a second Trump term.
So do you think that as all...
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Sunday, June 1st, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. Some developments in Ukraine that we're going to touch on right to start, but in my opinion, definitely feels like sort of not a distractionary story, but something that is taking the attention away from what's really going on when that story's been developing the same way for quite a long time, at least as I see it, and we'll overlap that with what Whitney said there to start. The main focus of today is to focus on the follow-up of the Palantir conversation and the kind of the shockwave that it sent through the MAGA community. And I think it's a very positive thing for people to be recognizing, possibly for the first time, that this is what has always been being built. Now, that doesn't have to mean that Trump was aware of that. If that makes it easier to digest, I would happily allow that thought to be, consider that myself. I do all the time. I've thought about this over the years. As you guys have watched this show, that I still don't even know whether I place Trump in a position where I think that he's being played in some cases, where as opposed to him, knowingly being a part of some agenda. And I think it's a mixed bag, but it's important regardless of that to recognize what is happening. At this point, it's no longer even debatable. Even the announcement, again, as I titled yesterday's show, of the new Palantir database, it's not even remotely new. But what's new is that it's being pointed to. And now a lot of people are seeing it for the first time and going, well, that's not what I asked for. But a lot of us have been ringing that bell and cataloging and documenting all of how it's being built together for quite a while. So that's going to be an important thing to start with today in regard to that continuing conversation. And a couple more additional points to the same thing we discussed yesterday on the COVID-19 mRNA injection conversation that is seemingly getting more intense day by day. Now, we're going to get into the overlap of the MAGA response to this and the interesting distractions therein that I also think are relevant. And then the second major point today is going to be about the aid massacre, which, like the flower massacre, it is pretty hard to miss what's actually happening. It doesn't stop them from screaming the narratives they want to scream, or the governments to support them from blindly going along with whatever they have to say, despite all the evidence, all the documentation. It's grotesque. And it's going to be, for those that want to be aware of it, maybe you don't want to see this today, or you have children tuning in. I shouldn't say it. I don't think there's too much graphic content, but it's just hard to watch innocent people starving to death and being shot at by the people claiming to be there to support them. And that this seems to have been what was going to happen from the beginning. At least people, like a lot of us would have argued, based on what's happened every single time before this. But I think it was Mohammed Shihad who put out a video 2 days before saying, this is what's going to happen. And then it happened. So it's very much worth considering whether that might have been the deliberate plan. And the reason I framed it in the title as the engineered aid massacre, because you have to understand that this, from an Israeli perspective, like, you could argue whether the U.S. wanted a genocide. At this point, it seems irrelevant, seeing as how they've continued to support it either way. But understanding that Israel has, at this point, it's so frustrating to have to quit. For years, the Israeli government, Netanyahu in particular, have been telling you this is what they wanted to accomplish. And so when this started post October 7th, a lot of us said, look at what they've been telling you. Look at their own words. And then, all the narrative and the lies about what was really there and Palestine never existed. Of course, and then it continues and we get even more information and we go, see, we were telling you, and there's new narratives. And at this point, it's come full circle. As somebody else was just making fun of. It's like it started where, what genocide, what occupation? And now literally telling you, well, the occupation is the end goal. It's like, well, that's exactly what we were telling you. And I mean, the further occupation. The point is their narrative that they said was fake is now the actual stated objective. And that's just really important to understand. And so when you see people being mowed down, who they have told you they want to get rid of, who they have told you is Amalek and needs to be destroyed, we shouldn't be surprised when you watch them do that. So we're going to go over all that in a couple of different points that evolve beyond that conversation from Israel and some immigration points I wanted to highlight that sort of kind of dovetail between these two conversations, the surveillance and the obvious immigration overlap. And then I think the Israel influence on that immigration conversation. And these aren't debatable. You can see them. The Israel Zionist organizations going deport this person, deport that person. And in many cases being proven to be lying. And people almost being deported regardless, being arrested for 48 hours, despite it turning out that Batar USA blatantly made up a crime or a claim. We're going to discuss one point today of Noam, Kristi Noam, in a conversation about somebody who they claim wrote a letter to assassinate Trump or threatened to. It turns out that was a fraud. And it's even being fact-checked on Twitter of all places. And it turns out that we're going to get into it all, but what's incredible is to see how their own radical mindset has almost being weaponized against them by people who know they're going to take the bait. Maybe that's all by design. I don't know. But it's important to be aware and to call out what this really is. The frivolous, completely unfair, what they're doing is affecting people's constitutional rights. Being floated as Americans being next more than once should be alarming, but it should matter to you, regardless of whether the person has a certain skin color, whether they're originally from this country. People that are here legally, who have no criminal record, have been sent to El Salvador. That alone should drive you crazy. And every time we talk about that, nonetheless, people go, well, how are they here legally if they cross the border illegally? It's like, I don't think you're listening to me. No criminal record and in the country legally. And many of them are in El Salvador. Many of them are still being arrested, being deported, visas being yanked out of nowhere for no reason and being sent because they don't have a visa, or people showing up to their legal court hearings, or not hearings, but immigration meetings. Not because they're forced to, but because they want citizenship or they're applying for asylum and then being arrested at that meeting. Hard to say that's the worst of the worst when they're people that are following through the law. Pretty sure the ones that don't show up for their meetings are probably a little bit worse, and they're not going after those ones, at least not in large. But we won't go into that in depth today, but it's important to keep tabs on that story. But let's start today with a quick point that I wanted to highlight that I thought was really interesting, and then we're going to touch on that whole Ukraine point and go back to Whitney's opening there. Now, this is actually pretty interesting, and you guys have seen this. I just wanted to make sure that this was documented on this show, and plenty of others have called this out. So this is the post from yesterday. Palantir's new U.S. surveillance database and FDA approves new mRNA COVID shot using vaccine placebo. We're going to touch on that again today. And actually a very, I guess, humorous, but at the same time alarming point of showing you why you can't trust Grok. It's exactly what we keep saying. It's a tool that can be used. And I, myself, as I said, wondering why I should still be using it at all and question that every time I do. The point, though, is that always check your information, whether it's an encyclopedia, a news channel, or Grok. You always double check your information. That's whether a doctor or whatever. That's the whole game they play where you're supposed to trust your authorities. Well, authorities are wrong all the time. A lot of times by choice. But the point is, this show got a lot, even on this platform, it got a lot of reach. There's thousands of people tuned in. But weirdly enough, even though it's pinned, you notice a lot of really, really, really low reach. With 76,000 followers, I find it hard when it's a popular show, when you can tell just by the engagement that it gets basically no reach. But we know what this is, guys. And by the way, take note that you can only see one comment despite there being 7 of them. And I'm going to tell you what that is right now. They're people that block you or you block that a lot of times don't show up. So what this is, for those that have already documented this, there's bots all over this platform that will jump in. Look, they even tag Daily Wrap Up on there. Clearly, this is targeted. And they jump in and they say, interesting read. And they tag one of these guys that are talking about investments. We all see these bots out there, but they go, I can't believe this investment I just made. Check this guy out. And it's all no following accounts. If you look at the account, 0 followers. It's a complete bot account, and they know it. They facilitate it on this platform. And it says, your market insights always help connect the dots. I didn't even touch on something like that in the show. And it says the Palantir FDA angle is definitely one to watch. Hashtag TLAV. They're not watching the show. Then they block me, as you can see. So what I'm showing you this for is the way that this is weaponized is that they know, as they've changed the algorithm, that if you get a lot of blocks and a lot of negative engagement, well, that suppresses your content. So that's not something that's organic. That basically gave them the ability to just mass flag. Oh, you mean just like with Jack Posobiec, or not Posobiec, I'm sorry, Dorsey, just like the last Twitter where they could just mass flag and it was down. And then we said, that's shadow banning. And they go, yeah, okay, here's the new version. So exactly the same thing with a slightly different flavor. Well, yeah, just like everything else today. The bottom line is these are Israeli bots or other bots or whatever manipulators who are actively doing this under certain shows. I'm sure you could decipher which ones those are that ultimately see that suppressed. And you guys chime in with what you see. Make sure people talk about this because this is a weaponized aspect of this website. If they cared about free speech, this would not be what happens. So all they do is dump down votes and blocks all over, and all of a sudden it gets suppressed. So since we're here, what I do every time. Oh, certainly do this. I'm just going to do it live so you guys can see. And I don't know whether this makes it worse or better. I'm really not sure. But because I just don't want them to keep doing this and I don't want them to be following me, I tend to go back. Look, 0 followers, 0. So May 20, they created this probably just for this whole thing. I go through and I block them. And then I go back and I hide it and block. Oh, I guess that's where I usually hide block from that one spot. So the post gets hidden, but that the effect is already there. Just thought that was worth pointing out, guys. I'm telling you, this stuff is everywhere. So on keeping that in mind, I mean, the whole thing we're talking about today, like the real kind of in the air conversation is the artificial intelligence, the surveillance, kind of the building out of their AI government Palantir technocratic panopticon. It's the digital control grid that we have been telling you is coming. And now finally it's being acknowledged. By the way, I'm realizing right now that I don't know if you saw this when I started the show. I put this Palestine coin on my necklace because I think it's really cool. But I can hear it clinking the whole time, and I guarantee you guys can hear it on the show. So I apologize for that. So I'm probably not going to keep wearing it for the show. But in case you didn't see it, somebody sent me this coin yesterday, and it's one of the that say Palestine on it. 1927, I think it says. I forget. And it basically just says, or what? No, that wasn't right. I forget the date. But basically just said, it exists. So I really appreciate that who sent that. So anyway, I wanted to note that in case in the podcast you're hearing that clinky noise, that won't be a regular occurrence. So back to the point. So discussing the idea of Ukraine. Now, the reason I included this is because I'm seeing this kind of fluctuate around the conversation. There's a few reasons this is important. 3 in my mind, really. One is that this is not new. Now, I'm not going to suggest this is not important. This is a war, and it's very real. And Israel and the United States and the UK are massively invested in what Ukraine is doing, if you can even call it that anymore. It's the Azov movement. It's a neo-Nazi proxy element that's been funded by Israel, the United States, and the CIA for decades. One of the most provable things in this conversation, I've gone over it extensively. The point is that for them to act like this is somehow not their involvement, or what happens through Ukraine is not their responsibility, is the same as pretending like the genocide is not their responsibility, or they're not culpable or complicit. So that's important to understand. It is a very big deal. And the secondarily, to understand that they are immersed in this and they're not, devoid of responsibility for what's going on. Because what we're going to get to is there's new reports about Ukraine's drones bombing into Russia. And I reported this from the UK Times, I think a year and a half ago. They were reporting that the U.S. government military was flying in Azov movement Ukrainian militants to attack inside of Russia. I mean, that was a long time ago. So if we're going to have some barrier being crossed, my point is, I think this is being hyper-focused on because of do not look at Palantir, do not look at everything else going on, don't look at the aid massacre and the genocide we're funding, focus on this, but also ignore that Trump and everybody else is involved in what's happening there. Now, that's just one part of this, though. The other part of it is to ask yourself how this ties into today's show other than just notating it. Well, that's because it turns out that you guys already know, if you watch this show, that both Palantir and Anduril are involved in funding and programming drones that are used by Ukraine. The same Palantir that's literally basically, I shouldn't be that hyperbolic with it, but, a huge part of the U.S. government right now. That has to be relevant. So keep that in mind, and we'll come back to it. Russia threatens NATO nations with revenge, nuclear strikes as Putin expands military bases along Finnish border, April 29th. So what this is one of the things I was able to pluck out that I'm seeing people look like. Basically, the narrative right now, which I should have just started with, is the idea that Putin just threatened to bomb NATO countries. Even though that is highly unlikely, My first thought, even though I always will double check and look into it, because that does not seem like something that Putin is. He's not as bombastic and belligerent as the U.S. and Israel tend to be with their foreign policy. You do that, I'll do something you've never seen before, is what you hear from Trump or the U.S. government. Historically, that's not what you see from Putin. You see more of a measured response. That does not mean good guy, understand? It just means that he's more, diplomatic, or more, what he does is not cartoonish in a political sense, right? It will be tactful. It'll be tactical. That's typically what you've seen. That's not a praise. It's just an objective reality of what he's done. Always playing the counterbalance to this bombastic U.S. foreign policy. Maybe just because he wants to be perceived that way, or maybe because he thinks it's the right way to go. That's for you to decide. The point, though, is to argue that he would come up and threaten to bomb NATO countries. What is the tactical strategy? What is the benefit to doing that? That should be your first thought. Who benefits? Why would they do that? Now, unless it is to threaten that so you respond, and that was never the plan, there's no strategy to saying, I'm going to do that if you do this. That's a childish kind of thing that you expect from U.S. foreign policy. Now, what's funny to me is that if you read the first paragraph, Russia's former president claimed NATO's newest members are potential targets for revenge strikes using nuclear weapons as a criminal. Oh, okay. So somebody who's not currently in the government said that's what might happen. Now it's not meaningless, but just so we pointed out before, when Lindsey Graham steps up and says, we should do all of this. Well, Lindsey Graham's an idiot. And 9 times out of 10, when he says things like that, they don't actually happen. It's more about serving the people that are funding him or screaming the narrative that Israel wants. But that's within the government. Now we're talking about somebody who's not. So now this is like saying Obama steps up and says, the U.S. government's about to bomb something. Well, that would still be Obama. He's got insight, but it's not the government. So I just think it's interesting how quickly these things from partisan mainstream alternative media cascade into emergency focus. Watch, World War III is coming, and I miss everything else that's going on. Again, not to downplay the seriousness of any war, especially this one. Here is a report from Alex Jones. Nuclear war alert. Putin publicly says he will nuke NATO countries if Western missiles strike Russia. Oh, guess that was September 2024. Funny how the same old narratives circle back around. And you know what? I remember this. And if you look into it, it's the same thing. Putin did not say, I'm going to bomb NATO countries. It's the same kind of hyperbolic, I think, head fake that we get from partisan media just like this. Now, just online, a quick kind of looking around, you see these kind of things. 14,000 views, not small. Breaking, NATO on full alert as Russia warns of potential strikes on countries supplying drones. Now, I guarantee you, and I have seen these statements in the past about saying, well, you're providing the support, drones, military weapons, which they know they are. Well, then you're responsible for what's happening. Putin has made that point 100 times over. You think he doesn't know right now already that they've been funding and supporting these people? He's called the same things out that we have. So to argue that suddenly this drone attack has changed something, it hasn't. So it's interesting that gets pointed to. He already knows these things. He knows the U.S. government's funding it, but he does know they're responsible. So I'm not going to diminish the possibility that if it was a large enough attack, which we'll get to in a second, that maybe he would respond in a way that might include the U.S. government. I would argue not, just because that would cascade this into a much larger issue. It would be so you're talking about a proxy element from the backing of the U.S. and everybody else attacking Russia. So likely they would respond on the proxy element or something in connection to it, not the U.S. government, because that would be World War III. And a lot of people love to frame the idea, which we've been there for a long time, as Putin or Assad or any of them being these belligerent maniacs just like violence. It's just that's what they need you to think, which is funny enough, usually how the people that are saying that kind of tend to think. But I don't see any real validity to that statement, or this one saying Putin orders high-level emergency meeting to as escalated the conflict, same kind of thing. Same videos, same clips. So let's get to where the meat of this is actually coming from. This is from today. And what's funny is a lot of the reports you're seeing fly around came out a couple hours after this. So typical mainstream alternative media, where you even get a mainstream media report and they just regurgitated it in their own version as if they've got secret sources. That tends to be the way this goes. Now, I'm not saying people don't have secret sources, but just recognize the grift that's going on today. Now, this is just simply saying Ukraine drones strike deep in Russia. Not the first time. Hitting military planes. Now, the target, if we get real confirmation of how serious it was, is a big deal. Ukrainian drones hit several Russian strategic airfields on Sunday, including the Belaya military base deep in eastern Siberia, after Moscow launched one of the longest drone and missile attacks in Kiev. So even right there, understand that Russia bombs into Kiev and then Ukraine responds. That's not like, you'd argue they kind of probably expected a response, right? Just thinking about this logically. So my point is not to expect some wild cascading issue when this is just the continued warfare that we've been seeing go on for years in this conflict that we should all be calling out, and the West is wildly involved in, that they want to pretend like they're not. More than 40 aircraft, which is a big deal, including the Tu-95, Tu-22, M3 long-range bombers capable of deploying conventional or nuclear weapons, which tends to be, they bomb nuclear planes. That's the way you can hyperbolically state that. They're planes that can carry a lot of things. Nonetheless, my point is just seeing that this is, I think, the continuation of the war. Here's some of the reports you're seeing circulate. Ukraine struck multiple strategic bombers, which came out, I think, an hour or so after that report. So it's the same thing. There are some videos, but it's still up in the air. This is happening as of right now. Now, let me play this clip again that we started with, and I want you to think about how important this becomes in the bigger picture. Now, this is in the immediacy of the issue, just Ukraine and Russia and what that's causing. We shouldn't overlook the smaller thing, or shouldn't say smaller, but the immediate issues, like the people suffering, the Ukrainian people who are dying every day because our governments are using them as batters against each other, or the people in Russia that are suffering in the same way, or the people in Donbass, or the people in Crimea that are suffering. And realize that's not, and never am I saying Russia good guy, but if you can't recognize the vast difference between the neo-Nazi Azov movement, CIA, Israel-funded maniacs that they've been using for a long time in that country, who are the reason people fled and Donbass doesn't want a part of it, versus the Russian government in particular. I mean, you're blinding yourself to it. So my point is that we should care about the smaller parts of, again, the immediate parts of this. But beyond that, we also should recognize, even if that's exactly what it looks like, the bigger high elevation view, which is that Palantir, Anduril, these governments are using this war for a lot of things. Starlink has been deployed. They're using their AI models and these drones to map things out and to test the war, just like they're doing in Israel. So is that why this is continuing? I thought Trump said he was going to end it on day one. Well, I never thought that was going to happen. But what else is happening? Is that they just couldn't do it? Or is there something else happening? So again, listen to what Whitney had to say about this.
Steel-funded or founded companies have, since Vance was announced, have essentially signaled that they're all in on the Trump-Vance campaign. And this also includes Palmer Luckey as well, of the defense contractor Anduril, which is making a lot of unmanned drones and other, defense weapons. It's building our virtual border wall on the U.S.-Mexico border that Trump supports instead of a physical barrier that he used to campaign on. And they're also hugely involved in the Ukrainian conflict. So any sort of possibility of a second Trump administration winding down American aid to Ukraine, I think with Thiel in the equation, becomes questionable right away, because Anduril, Clearview, and Palantir itself intimately involved with the Ukrainian military as it relates to the conflict with Russia.
Well,
so anything that would see their contracts or their bottom line as it relates to their involvement in that conflict, I think it's unlikely that it would whittle down significantly.
Okay, so two things to consider. One, whether just out of pure financial interest that maybe they don't want this to end. I mean, you realize that I see this more of the mind as like the technocratic, like globalist Western, whatever, with the U.S. direct driving it kind of thing right now, where they're all part of that, where they do have a similar agenda they're trying to accomplish. But at the same time, we also have the individual direction and possible intentions, or rather objectives, of Palantir itself. One of them being to continue to profit, to continue to grow their in control. So wondering whether on a personal level that they might have just driven this into continuing, counter to what the U.S. administration wants to do. But beyond that as well, the larger picture, I think they all have a very clear interest in maintaining this, one, because of the ongoing dilemma, or, the geopolitical game they play with Russia. That's never stopped being there. But on top of that, the bigger picture, again, of the AI, the training their large language models, the surveillance and enforcement side of that we just rolled out them, or again, that's what they're telling you, but it's always been there, the Palantir database, and they're telling you they're real-time monitoring immigrants, which means everybody in this country. They need this information to continue to grow my point is that they need the surveillance drone dynamic of that to do all of this. One of the things to consider, not that we know for sure, is that this is continuing, or all of them are being continued, so that they can reach a certain endpoint as they roll out their technocratic panopticon digital control grid.
Significantly
So-
if Thiel has the influence that is to be expected in a second Trump term.
So do you
By the way, that's just where the clip
think
ends.
that is already?
So, keeping that in mind, just simply asking Brave, it says Anduril Industries have been supplying drones to Ukraine, including the Altuis 600M and Altuis 700M loitering munitions, which are designed for reconnaissance and precision strikes against unidentified targets. I said that funny. So the podcast, against identified targets. So isn't that what we just saw happen? So it's not hard to piece together that means that the attack they just carried out was being provided, the device and the technology was provided by Anduril and Palantir, which is a part of the U.S. administration at this point. And the U.S. government is absolutely involved with funding and continuing this war. So, you can't really decouple these things. Now, it says the drones have been used by Ukrainian forces to disrupt Russian troop advances and target positions behind the front line. Well, there you go. The UK government also signed a contract, which again adds to the global dynamic of all of this. Here's the contract. Advanced attack drones for Ukraine in a new deal struck by the UK government. So you have Anduril in their UK branch making a deal with the UK government to supply drones to Ukraine. Then you've got Anduril with the US doing the same thing for Ukraine. That's very telling. Now, Palantir, in regard to the same conversation, is involved in the use of drones in Ukraine, providing software that help in identifying and targeting Russian troops. Now, Palantir's technology is reportedly being used to train drones to recognize Russian soldiers by their uniforms and their movements. You don't think that's relevant to what we're discussing? Being able to differentiate between people by their movements and how they look, their dress, their biometrics. That's very important to be able to police an entire country, don't you think? That's where this is going if you're not paying attention. Here is Forces News. Ukraine trains army of robot drones to identify Russian troops by their movement and their uniform. Let's cut to the chase. 2024. Palantir, a U.S. software company and one of the firms driving Ukraine's push toward AI drones. It's where we're going. It's what they're doing. It's where we are. The Palantir software collates data from a number of sources: human intelligence, drones, radar, and even thermal imaging that can detect troop movements or artillery fire. Oh, and let's not forget how interesting it was that very recently, right about the same time they were really hyping that whole weird drone thing that Jones pushed like 17 different arguments for that never even materialized, about secret drones everywhere and how they were going to be sniffing for nuclear material, or it was Iran one day, next it was something else, and then it just vanished and no one talked about it anymore, which happens almost every day. The whole "they're all right" is only when you look at in specific, one of the 45 things they claimed that day about the same topic. But here is a clip that was put out during the Army-Navy game. And even that had big Palantir advertisements everywhere. Remember that? Just in case you forgot, this is what they're involved in. It shouldn't be surprising. And this is, oh, did I forget to grab that? This is, how did I do that? Important to consider in the small, like the tiny, like the drone discussion that we also recently talked about from the nanotech side of it, the tiny drone discussion. I think it was Zoe and I that talked about that and where this goes. And this is all, it's kinetic attack, military, but it's also surveillance. It's also monitoring. It's also enforcement. I think that's what's really important to take from this. So here is the clip they played, which it's kind of like that video we talk about, or we've shown, right, where you have the Navy, the military basically saying, we're in the shadows, we're committing psychological operations, that weird, creepy video, where they just kind of say what I guess others would argue isn't even true. It's what this kind of feels like. Oh, here, I have to get rid of one. Hold on. And here it is. So here comes your world, right? The monitored, surveilled, wartime, so this is all wartime technology coming home. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about the larger overlap Palantir's new U.S. surveillance database and FDA approves new mRNA COVID shot using vaccine placebo. Now, again, I'm not going to get into that today, but to make that point clear, the whole thing was that RFK just recently pointed out that the placebo thing is we're going to go back to that with saline, right? That we have to do all of them that way. Any new vaccine will be placebo saline. Okay. The problem is that in this one, none of them used a placebo at all. Neither the safety test or the efficacy test. Usually it'd be a safety test. But in all of the rest of them, what they used was comparative vaccine. They used the old Moderna vaccine and compared it to the new vaccine. Definitely not a placebo test, and definitely not one thing that even RFK called out in previous conversations. And now we're going to get into the rolling out of new shots that even Grok doesn't want to tell you about, which I find very interesting. So make sure you watch this, by the way. I think this is a really important show. But as we showed you, Mary Tally Bowden says, I could not, again, that's one thing I forgot to mention. One of the things I pointed out in the last show as well, which was from the one before that actually, is that on the schedule, as far as I can tell, I didn't check this morning, but yesterday, they did not actually change the schedule. They're saying they're going to do that, and maybe it'll happen tomorrow. Maybe there's a reason it's going to take a minute. But right now, the schedule still does not say what they claim they just changed, which is kind of what I expected, to be honest. But she says on top of that, because it still says this, keep in mind from the CDC, getting a COVID vaccine is a safer, more reliable way to build protection than getting sick with COVID. They're still arguing that. Despite the fact that, for all we know, that's not even something that's actually out there and it's a flu manipulation, or on top of that, that what we do have from the peer-reviewed science says that it was less than the flu from day one. And so they're telling you to take the thing that they told you, that RFK told you was deadly, dangerous, shouldn't be taken. And now they're on the CDC, which is not RFK, but HHS, under his umbrella, are still telling you that these things are a safer alternative to whatever else. I mean, my opinion, it's not a safer alternative to anything. These things are deadly, right? And it's just wild to me. Now, she also points this out, and this was the injection we just talked about. This is the mNEX spike. This is an mRNA injection. We announced, Moderna says today, and this was on the 31st, that the U.S. FDA has approved the mNEX spike, a new vaccine against COVID-19, a new injection for COVID, for use for adults in 65 and older, as well as individuals. Oh, see, that's actually interesting. Oh, that's actually interesting. So I'm wondering if this point, because it goes on to say, as well as individuals 12 through 64 that have at least one underlying condition, which, as we pointed out before, could be basically benign, small things that should not rationalize this choice, especially from someone who told you this thing was deadly. But what's interesting to me is that that's the statement they make about the schedule, but that the schedule currently does not reflect that point. So maybe they only meant this new one they're rolling out. I don't really know. FDA approval for the third product. So that's now. Here, Shannon Joy points out what Peter McCullough was discussing around the self-amplifying shots, which is this one. This is the other shot, one of the few that they're rolling out. This is the self-amplifying bird flu shot that the current administration, not the Moderna one that they continued and then canceled recently, I think is sort of a sidestep, head fake. They are rolling this one forward. They fast-tracked this one, in fact. But Peter McCullough says COVID-19 replicon samRNA injections induce severe blood abnormalities. So nothing new, I guess, in regard to COVID-19 mRNA shots. So this may be the most acutely toxic COVID vaccine thus far. Think about that, guys. And so the MAGA administration is rolling out the new ones. This is what he's discussing. Shannon Joy says Trump and Kennedy have inexplicably fast-tracked an saRNA injection, and initial clinical trial results are horrifying. Nearly every participant got sick post-injection. This level of human experimentation is grotesque. I flatly agree with that. And 5 times August just makes the obvious point. Us in January, remove the COVID shots. Us in February, remove the COVID shots. Us in March, remove the COVID shots. April, same. May, same. Remove the COVID shots. The government at the end of May, we've approved a new COVID shot. So they're listening. And this is not just one. This is the majority of the people that are on the side of this currently in the administration. You know that. So this I found really interesting. An example of why, as always, and what we've been stressing, that you should never take at face value what any of these AI overlaps have to say. They're tools, and there's reasons people can rationalize to use them. I do it all the time, but here and there we use it to make points, like showing people on partisan sides that this is one showing they're wrong. Never will we take this face value. And usually it's research we've done already that we use this to make a point in this regard. And I mean, all of these are already pulled up. I can show you afterward. The point is, I asked how many other mRNA shots are the Trump administration currently supporting? Here's what it said. The Trump administration's stance on mRNA vaccines in 2025 shows a mixed approach with significant pushback, stated anyway. The administration, it says, is not actively funding or promoting any mRNA vaccines. It mentions the Stargate project, but as a future direction. No broad support for mRNA vaccines. Okay. Conclusion, the Trump administration is not currently supporting any mRNA shots in a direct, tangible way, with the possible exception of Stargate. Okay. Now, if you stop there, you might think that sounds logical. Well, I said, did you forget about the star mRNA vaccine candidate, ARCT-2304? That's this one. I said that one for pandemic influenza that was just supported by RFK's HHS. Here's our response. Thank you for pointing out the oversight regarding that exact mRNA shot for bird flu. I appreciate the opportunity to address this and provide a corrected response. Oops. Certainly could have just been an oversight. Hard to think you can get more than one in a row like that, though, right? The Trump administration, through Department of Health and Human Services, under RFK Jr., is supporting the thing they just told you wasn't happening. Okay, and again, it says the Trump administration, via HHS, is supporting that shot. Then it says, though, but that's it. Beyond this, there's no evidence of it actively supporting other mRNA shots. Okay. Are there any other mRNA shots that current Trump administration are supporting that you also forgot about? They say, after reviewing your available information and considering your previous request, no. Again, they say simply say their Trump is not supporting anything other than the one you pointed to. I said, did you forget about the mNext spike, mRNA 1283, that it was approved yesterday? That we know has been posted all over this platform, so it knows that's going on. And I said, thank you for bringing up the MX spike. And I apologize for the oversight and not addressing it in my previous response. I'm sure you feel really bad about it. It says, you're absolutely correct that the US FDA did approve that shot. And it says the approval of it occurred under the Trump FDA, which you all know. And it says the administration is currently supporting 2 mRNA shots. And how long can you keep doing this? And what about this one? You know, it's just, the point is, these are the 2 that we can literally prove that's currently happening. Mary Talley Bowden's pointed out there's, hundreds of them in the works right now. What they're going to lean into or not is up to you. But the Stargate platform in and of itself is about just the ones coming forward. I just find that wild. You know what I mean? Like the idea that it can be so blatantly, this is not, guys, in my opinion, this is not an oversight. Grok has access. I posted about it on this platform. So did plenty of you. So and they access anything on there that mentions the things we're discussing, mRNA shots, and they didn't say it was there until I pointed it out. And this is not new. Plenty of people have done this with other conversations. And then another one. And I said, what about, no, that's the only one. And sorry, oversight. To me, just like with South Africa, that is a deliberate tailoring of this for obvious reasons. Now, is that Elon doing that? Is that somebody working at this platform? Am I wrong entirely? Consider all of it and recognize that this is a weird effort to take when that doesn't seem to be the focus of Elon and the rest, unless you stand back and look at the bigger picture. Now, I'll include these. You can check out these posts for yourself to recognize that, yes, in case that wasn't enough for you, the Trump administration is 100% leaning into the mRNA direction. And this one's the one we just discussed. Moderna receives FDA approval for a mRNA shot for COVID. Now, that important understanding, that important part of the story, just to reiterate from yesterday, and the fact that we're being lied to about it. On some other health points to highlight really quickly before we get into the specifically the conversation about the Palantir overlap with MAGA. There's a lot of things I'm seeing that we should at least consider are being done in a distractionary sense. So what I keep seeing is a lot of this kind of throwback. Like, isn't it weird that all of a sudden a lot of the people that we always highlight were all of a sudden going, World Trade Building 7? Okay, well, yeah, that's an important conversation, right? But my point at the time was, is there something new that came up? Was there some new development? Was there a new data point, a new study that came out? No, okay, then why did you all weirdly start bringing it up? That's something you should recognize. Maybe they just saw one person did it and another person said the same thing. Maybe it's organic, or maybe it's because they're just trying to tap into older things they know you're interested in to make you look away from anything else. I also saw, as I always point out, new Las Vegas points coming up. Now, and it just get people reaching into it. Or the conversation of, as we'll get into in a second, of all of a sudden Trump saying Joe Biden is a robot or a clone or whatever, which we shouldn't dismiss anything, certainly possible. But why now? Knowing that that is something that people will love to jump at, their favorite reality TV show. So one of these points I think is important that it makes me sick, by the way, that this is being used by people that I think, and this is my opinion, to keep you looking elsewhere and only framing it around Biden as usual. Here's Benny Johnson. Breaking, newly uncovered emails reveal that the Biden administration deliberately covered up health risks from East Palestine. Yeah, real bombshell, Benny. They knew about the cancer clusters, but told the public there was nothing to worry about. Yeah, that's true. Now, we don't need these emails to make that case. So why is this suddenly trickling out? I find it interesting because you have to understand, guys, there's countless examples of these kind of things happening currently throughout previous administrations, going back to Trump's last administration. The point, it's not partisan. Their shtick is to think anytime there's a big story, here's Biden, he's a criminal, or bad Democrat, pedophiles, Muslims, rapists, look at the immigration, anything to get you buzzwords looking away, none of which are unimportant points of the story. And then, of course, one part that really bugs me, by the way, Benny Johnson takes a screenshot of somebody else's work, and that's it. Doesn't even give you the whole article. Gives you a screenshot of part of the article, the part that blames Biden, because that's all he really cares about. He doesn't want you to have all the details. He just wants you to have limited information to outrage you in a certain direction, because that's what people like this do. But here's the actual article we'll go through, show you what it actually says, which is not really, there's parts that are worth pointing out. It doesn't even singly mention the word dioxin, which is important in all this. But the main point is, I'm glad it will get attention, but what's going to come of it? Are they going to do something? Is Biden or anybody else going to be held accountable? I sure hope so, but you damn well know that's not going to happen. If we haven't seen arrests for Epstein or anything else, or COVID-19 or Social Security or USAID, explain to me why you think this is going to go anywhere. So all they're doing is using something we care about, in my opinion, to get you outraged over here and looking back to the old administration, instead of recognizing the most important things happening right now in a non-partisan perspective. So just in case you forgot, here is a few of the articles we put out on this. This is from 2023. Dioxins in East Palestine, hundreds of times greater than safe levels. All this is proven. This one's important. This one was the same point they're making. Literally the same point. The Ohio cover-up and the overwhelming intentional incompetence, malfeasance of the U.S. government. That's Biden's administration. Just, as always, just like we did yesterday, demonstrating our value that this is not some breaking story. If you paid attention even partially to what we've been covering. It's undeniable, guys. The evidence was there. They dragged their feet. The test results coming back were showing you very early that there was a major problem. And and a lot of these people used it insofar as they could to attack one side of the conversation. And mark my words, despite these emails proving what we already know, I doubt you're going to see any real momentum. Now, they may mobilize some kind of action. My point is, what ends up happening? That's all that matters. Bluster and narrative and investigations, what happens? Just like with Trump. And the many times he's been investigated to make you feel he's somehow fighting the deep state. What else? What happened? Nothing is what happened. Here, this one's important. 2023 investigation found East Palestine controlled burn, which is what many of them still call it, including News Nation, unnecessary. This was, in case you forgot, that in court, it was proven that they lied. The volunteer fire chief, it testified to the fact that he was told, or rather they omitted the fact that the expert from Norfolk Southern was on the record saying this was treated vinyl chloride and it would not explode, most likely. And yet they used the argument that it was likely going to explode to drive the fire chief to make the choice to do what they knew would speed up the pace, but also increase the fallout to an exponential degree. They lied about it. They withheld that and knew that would happen. And then they blamed him. They rolled forward. And guys, there's obviously something else that went down here. That's been my opinion from the beginning. So, and here, same thing. Here's Nick Sorter taking a video that isn't his, that we all shared at the beginning, and putting his name on it and simply going, breaking, something we talked about a long time ago. Plenty of the glip, just like the same grift he did in Lahaina, guys. That's what these people do, my opinion. Look into it for yourself. The point is, as Alien Invader says, that we were talking about this a long time ago. Here's the article. FEMA White House covered up East Palestine devastation. Now, it says, in September 2023, 7 months later, President Biden issued an executive order, sending FEMA executive Jim McPherson to East Palestine to assess communities' unmet needs. But new documents from FEMA obtained through Freedom of Information Act show extensive coordination between FEMA, the White House, the National Security Council, the EPA, and the Department of Justice, voicing serious concerns about health, toxins, and unmet needs of East Palestine following train derailment. That's important. So that, regardless of, see, I should also point out before we get in further that it's important to realize that the truth is often used as one of the best distractions. Realizing that people can use things that we know to drive us in a direction away from something big happening. So in that case, the point is this is important. Like I said, though, let's see if they ever care to go beyond, look over there, and actually try to put someone in jail for it, which is what I want, whether left or right. The reality is that this is very clear. The tests were showing that. And yes, they actively did cover it up. So, one, the EPA, the people involved, should be immediately held accountable. There should be hearings. And beyond that, though, it should be discussed how this continued and what other locations we're talking about. Or the one we just talked about in, gosh, I'm blanking on the name now, the location where the guy died. Many other examples of this, and it's not just unique to here. Dioxins are a huge problem. And and that's the third point. How is that not brought up to this point? That is the obvious reality. Even they were forced to acknowledge it. And now as it's rolling back up, all the grifters won't point out the real point, which is about dioxins. It says, but their public message was not to be concerned. It says, quote, they also knew that they called this plume a really toxic plume. But I don't think that was ever really disputed. Even they said the plume was toxic. It was about whether it was immediately a risk to people near it, which is what we were saying from day one. They knew that there would be a potential for cancer clusters. Let's try to find this. Shoot. I forget the article, but there's one that talks about, was it 18 states across? The bottom line being that they were well after the point reported that it actually turned out that the plume reached like 16 states across. And it's exactly what we were telling you from day one, not because we were guessing, because we were looking at the science from before and showing you what logically how far these things could go, talking to people like Scott C. Smith. Now, it goes on to say, this email reveals that the FEMA coordinator was told not to engage with the residents. Now, frustratingly, all you get is this weird screenshot out of focus, which if you read for yourself, you could make a fair argument for why that's not really what this was. I don't think that. I think it's obvious there's a cover-up. But the evidence seems almost designed to be flimsy, which is kind of where I feel like this is going. The reality is, if you read that little, they're just basically saying, like, maybe the way you could reframe it is that you're waiting for more information before you scare anybody. Now, again, I don't think that's what happened. But it says we're supposed to believe that's not how our country runs. And I'm starting to see that's how our country is always run. You're right, even to this very day. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about the MAGA response to a lot of this. Now, as Dominic Trippi points out, I have not seen one mainstream MAGA influencer or anyone with direct ties to the administration discuss the recent Palantir story. Not one. The silence should be telling you something. Now, I have seen a couple, but it is very conspicuous to point out how little, that they know that that's a problem. And if their interest was the truth, then it wouldn't matter. Their interest is Trump first as opposed to America first. That's no different than the Biden first versus America first. It's the same damn thing. Now, this person, Sir S. Cantor, points out, oh, look, Trump's Truth Social reposting, as he calls it, fan fiction for vegetables. Now Biden was executed in 2020, and we've been watching a parade of soulless clones and deep fake androids ever since. He goes, yeah, bro, that's definitely more believable than Trump giving Palantir your biometric soul and rolling out warp speed like it was a new game show prize. He says, this is the MAGA op in full swing. Keep the base believing in fantasy so they never hold their messiah accountable. Because if Joe's been a robot since 2020, what exactly has Trump been doing for the last 4 years? Let me guess, 5D chess against clones. And this is all his opinion. It says, if you're still buying this clown level cope, you're not a digital soldier. You're the target audience. Now, regardless of your opinion about, I agree with that general framing. And the problem is, here's the actual this is Truth Social went out. And it simply says there's no Joe Biden. And this was from somebody else that Trump shared, executed in 2020. Biden clones, doubles, robotic engineering. And this is how he tends to play it. Simply saying, oh, I like the picture. I shared it. I didn't even somehow trying, plausible deniability. So he didn't post it, but that's rarely the case. But the Patriot Voice says this is a massive distraction from the fact that Trump is getting absolutely grilled on all sides for teaming up with Palantir to create a database of all Americans. But again, and I think he's pointed this out in the past, it's not new to right now, and it's not new to this administration. Palantir has been immersed, as we just showed you in the last show, which is why it's important, going back to Trump's last administration or before that, and then through Biden's. And they made new contracts. So it is a nonpartisan concept. He says, what better way to attempt to get people to stop talking about that than to share something absolutely fringe and outlandish on his official Truth Social account? People will now forget about the digital prison being constructed for them, chasing mindless rabbit holes about Biden. See how easy that was? I exactly agree with that. And this is my point I keep making. A lot of times people seem to frame it as sort of like just trying to, make fun of somebody or go. I'm rarely is that the case. I'm sure there's been a case here and there where I just want to call somebody out, but it's always about this. It's about how these things are used, how these grifters are out there reacting to things in order to get you driving down certain directions. And to me, when you see stuff like that, whether he even believes it or not, it doesn't matter. It's about getting people to go, oh, that's what I was saying. Oh, Biden's a troll, he's a clone. And, look, if we understand the reality of technology, understand the reality of presidents historically almost always having body doubles, that's not a secret. Look it up for, national security or, Secret Service. Not the same as saying an identical one, right? But my point is, it's not that far-fetched to think about something like that being a reality. But I care about evidence. To me, I see anomalies. I see very weird things that do suggest there's, something happened, but it doesn't have to prove to me that. I would like more evidence, obviously. The point, though, is regardless of whether it's even true, it's being pointed to now, in my opinion, in order to get you to jump in that direction and ignore the obvious, exactly like Patriot Voice said. And this is the Free Thought Project posted this. It says, relax, bro. And it says, other federal databases already exist. Palantir is just making it more efficient, all with red hats. And that's not a joke, what we're hearing today. Here's what Kerry Wedler said. It says, hi, guys, it's actually okay that the Trump regime may be building a massive centralized surveillance apparatus courtesy of the CIA-funded deep state tech corporation Palantir, because Kamala and the Democrats would have done the same thing. It says, say many of the same people who claim to hate the deep state and remain outraged that Kamala and the Democrats are deep state demons. It's just hypocritical logic, if logic at all. That's funny. Cash Patel says, look at me. I am the deep state now, like Captain Phillips. Now, aside from that, we're getting a lot of stuff that I think is just like business as usual, which is, I think, funny. Now, I mean, who's to know what they see or don't see? The funny thing to me is that this is something on their radar. This is a massive story that everyone's, the normies are getting involved in. So that means And at yesterday, Cat Turd posted that everything's better since Trump's been in office. You can almost just picture that meme of being burning down building. Oh, everything's fine. But I just said, LOL, this effing guy. I posted to my show. It's like, are you kidding me? It's just transparent to me that it's like, we're okay. Everything's great. Winning. Well, it's clearly going the wrong direction. Sir S. Cantor also points this out. Says, how do you know MAGA and Q are a psychological operation? Easy. Their entire research framework. Now, I want to be clear. I don't think this is in any way representative of all conservatives. Frankly, as you've heard from me say before, I think most of them are in a much different category here. They just don't know what else to do. Think maybe Kamala still would have been worse, and so they just kind of stick with it. But what they're talking about, I'm not speaking for this person. Maybe they think it's all of them. I'm saying I think that it is a fraction of the MAGA, inner circle conversation. Maybe, and it's a lot of people, but I don't think it's the majority, my opinion. But on that note, and that's what I'm referencing when I read this, how do you know MAGA and Q are a psychological operation? Their entire research framework, she says, revolves around one thing: protect the idol. Remember, that's what I said. It's Trump first, not America first for a lot of them. Everything they analyze, every headline, leak, scandal, psyop, they run it through one filter. How does this clear Trump of wrongdoing? And look, we saw this with Cat Turd early, where many of them were, or even Mary Talley Bowden just told us that somebody was reaching out to her going, hey, get on team. Stop calling out these shots. We know we'll fight them later. Stop doing it now because we're trying to help Trump, get better influence. How is that? And she called it out and said, that's absurd. I care about the truth. And that's why I respect her. And so this is the same thing as Cat Turd and the rest going like, stop calling him out. We have to unify. Or Kyle Rittenhouse comes out and says Second Amendment stuff, which are very important to point out. Due process second, take the guns first. I mean, obviously, or his bump stock bill. I mean, these are real. And yet they went after him saying, you can't say those things about Trump until he fell back in line. So that's the point. They run it through that filter. How does this help Trump? How does it clear him of wrongdoing? If it does, they post it. If it doesn't, they ignore it. If it contradicts their narrative, they call it a deep fake or a clone or optics or move on. And that's the thing is where you point it out and say, well, here's the evidence. They go, that's from an article I don't like or whatever. And they never look further. They go forward assuming that it's fake. It's a self-protection kind of concept. This isn't truth-seeking. It's hopium laundering. A real movement investigates power. Exactly. MAGA protects it, specifically one man. What happened to the plan to save the world? It became a plan to save one man. They say Trump was right about everything, which we are now seeing circulate, which is funny, or Alex right about everything. It's the same point. He goes, okay, let's test that. Was he right about mRNA injections, Palantir surveillance AI, Operation Warp Speed, Stargate, biodigital infrastructure, 5G, and the rise of predictive policing, Zionist foreign policy, endless loyalty to Israel? Clearly not. Or at least that's what, it was things that were, I guess, what you, like, for example, mRNA injections. He still supports that. We all know it was a failure, or rather, they're deadly, to say it accurately. So you in no objective way can say he was right about that. But they say, no, then shut up with the Messiah complex. You're not waking people up. You're repackaging tyranny in red, white, and blue. You're so brain dead that you actually believe Canada will sell itself for a measly $61 billion when Canada doesn't even own itself in the first place. Cheering for globalization because it's Donald. It's not a revolution. It's a ritual. And Trump's not the savior. He's the siren call dragging you deeper into the beast system while you cheer, chant, and call it freedom. Grow some balls, they put, and stop blindly supporting Trump. You can read that for yourself. It's pathetic, and we can smell, I'll leave. You can read that for yourself. Basically saying you're just basing yourself, you are blindly going after what your team wants you to, regardless of whether it's factual, whether it helps people, and it's sad. And this is President Trump was right about everything, billboard. And that's the Palantir point. Oh, and you might have seen this circulating, which is that's what I was saying earlier. Something that should be absolutely meaningless by now. Or like, who cares about this at this point? And the point was about the whole Nazi salute thing, which is just hilarious that it keeps being brought back up by the people who keep telling us that it's not important. And Elon Musk says, you don't have the legacy media enough. You don't hate them enough. And it's simply showing, according to legacy media, Cory Booker doing a Nazi salute is okay, and Trump or Musk doing it isn't. And that's the objective way to frame this, is it doesn't matter, just like with Musk, whether or not he meant, whether I should say it matters whether he meant that. And you don't know that. It's up to him. It's in his mind. The point is, he could obviously do that and be too stupid to realize how obvious that looks like something else. Maybe that's possible. Booker is the same thing. Except the difference is Booker did it, the way you've seen it in the past, where it's sort of a gentle thing, which doesn't change it for me. Musk does it with his slap and his arm up. And it's funny, you can compare it, by the way, to that, the point they make is simply, and here's what's funny about this. They said, hey, Grok, which one more closely resembles a Nazi salute? And Grok says Elon's does, because of its forcefulness, because of the way he puts his hand, because of, which, by the way, is what makes a difference. For me, this is all meaningless. The funny thing is, you don't know whether or not one of them meant it or not. Elon's definitely looks a little bit more like something you would expect, but my point was the same then. We don't know, so put it to bed. He says it wasn't, but the obvious thing to say is it was that. That was one of those salutes, but maybe he didn't mean it that way. That's fair. The point, same with Cory Booker. Same thing. You put your hand up, you put it up. That is the same thing. So maybe he did it without knowing. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he's a secret Nazi. Until we can prove it, it really is irrelevant. But that's the kind of stuff that Elon all day has been screaming onto this platform, and yesterday, because he's just, look over there, look at this thing, they're all Nazis, even though they know it's a silly conversation that most people don't care about. So all of that's to say that we are missing the forest for the trees if you're falling into that. Now, I'll include Derek's article again, Welcome to the Palantir World Order, that he wrote on April 2025. Now, here are some clips that I think are relevant. Now, this is just building on yesterday's show, so please take time to go back and watch that if you really want to understand the depth that I think that goes to. But this, Reed Cooley points this out. CIA agent and head of Palantir, Alex Karp, says his company's software single-handedly stopped the far right in Europe. That's interesting. Founded in 2003 with funding from CIA's InQtel program, Palantir's only client before 2008 was the CIA. So it's really not that unfair to call him an agent of the CIA. Here's what he had to say. I think this is fascinating, seeing as how, like we keep showing you, people that are aware of the bigger picture, nonpartisan, that people like this, they not only do they not care about your politics, they use it against you. Now, I shouldn't say not care. I mean, I guarantee they've got their own opinions. It's about using what you are and what you believe in to carry out their objective. And so, like the woke dynamic was leaned into by these same people in a previous administration, we now see the same thing happening over here. Now, I don't mean exactly Karp or exactly Teal, but there was examples, by the way, of Karp, but in other examples of this same field, where it's like just taking USAID and using woke to accomplish certain regime change. Well, now that's no longer the, flavor du jour. So now suddenly it's something different, even though it is still happening in many cases, including circumcision in Africa, which is still being funded by the Trump administration, despite all the people lying about it. So here is a clip where he makes the case about stopping the far right. Now, plenty in the Trump administration wouldn't call themselves the far right, but that is what they're talking about when they make this conversation. A lot of people are saying and are referencing towards that kind of, MAGA extremist side as they see it. I think it's important simply because if you are on the side where you think these people are fighting for some kind of a right-leaning objective, how does this line up for you?
Well, we built PG, which single-handedly stopped the rise of the far right in Europe. We built Foundry, which was used to distribute the COVID vaccine and saved millions of lives globally.
And by the way, now Foundry is what's being used and being embedded in basically every department in this country. I mean, that's what they're going for. It's already Health and Human Services. It is Department of Commerce. It is I think they're going for Education Department. It is the Defense Department. It is the State Department. It is IRS. It's ICE. All of these are on the record. And Israel is completely overwrapped with Foundry and the program that it is. It's easy to look up. And so as you have a Palantir company that is working with Israel to commit genocide and supplying drones and technology to another group that are bombing into another country, and you can see that they're supporting that genocide and funding that AI direction, and they're now using these technologies in this country for whatever. I mean, how do you not wonder, at least, if Israel has access to all of this? That's just where my mind goes, guys. But I think it's important to understand that regardless, it's easily accessible. They're removing the silos and patching it all in one place. They're using it all to train their AI models. It's not in the interest of Americans. It never has been.
We built what we call multi-constellation, and what's often called the digital kill chain. And they're category-defining products. So when you deliver these products to the market, just honestly, people say this isn't going to exist, this isn't valuable, but then it changes the market. And then the market is the Palantir market. Now, that doesn't mean everyone in the world is going to buy our product, but it means most of the sensible people in the world are going to buy from the category we defined.
Yep. Engineering reality, which is, by the way, exactly what the whistleblowers from Palantir just said. They put out this document about the Shire. I forget the title. Actually, I could probably bring that up. But they also put out a video making the same point. There it is. I'll include the document you can read. The Scouring of the Shire, a letter from concerned Palantir alumni to the tech workers of Silicon Valley. And the main point is simply that they are violating the principles they laid out to begin with. So, understanding that this is interlocked, it kind of overlapped with all the bigger agendas, the surveillance dynamic, overlapping from foreign countries, the fact that the company literally worked for the CIA for 5 years alone with nobody else, and understanding that, as we'll get to in a second, total information awareness was a CIA program that became Palantir, just like with XAI and the rest, guys. And I'll play a clip about that, where this is how this tends to work. The CIA basically begins these different things, and they, just like with Israel and Unit 8200, it's not a unique model, and they roll these things out under guise of being independent, and really they're just an extension of the intelligence apparatus. But the fact that that's so obvious, again, we just can't ignore that Israel, in my opinion, is influencing this country inside right now, if not already completely occupying it. We got to stop shying away from being honest about how overwhelmingly clear this is. Here's another clip, and this is the general speaking about Operation Warp Speed, General Gus Perna, and the important addition of one certain company.
It's the teamwork with industry, academia, and the government that really made us successful. And Palantir, I'm going to just self-report, the reason why I'm here is they were such a great teammate. And Julie and...
So remember, by the way, that's Palantir as well as Oracle. So Oracle was the one doing the pharmacovigilance data that they claim they're using for the AI Stargate program. What was Palantir doing? I mean, were they just doing the same thing? That seems redundant and expensive. I highly doubt that. I think what we now see is they were utilizing that circumstance to build out what we're doing right now and to train and model and biometric scan and whatever else it takes for them to do that. Now they're taking all the data sources and training those models, and I think we're like the final stage of all this. Just think about that. Operation Warp Speed, always a military program, one thing to the next.
Aaron, two people that many people know in this room, were a big part of that, and I'm going to walk my way through that in a moment. Because I just enjoyed what they did. And I wouldn't be here if that wasn't a part of their persona. And I'll articulate that in a little bit. So I spent 40 years in the Army. I did 2 in the National Guard while I was finishing college, and I did 38 years of active duty. I started out as an infantry officer and begrudgingly went to become a logistics officer. Turned out, very lucky move for me. I was an average infantry officer. I was a great logistician. My self-reporting. But truthfully, I think, you know, results at the end of the day validate my comment. So it was the best thing that ever happened to me. My love was running through the woods and doing the maneuver and attacking. The hardest thing I ever did was learn how to become a logistician, where data is so, so important. But I know you can understand this. In the last 40 years, data hasn't been as prevalent as we might think it is, because now there's so much of it. Back in those days, there really wasn't a lot.
Right. So that's actually really important. At the time, back, you know, where there wasn't as much constant data, it was, I guess, perceived in some cases more important. I don't know if I still buy the fact that it got less important for a while, but the point is, regardless, what they're doing with Foundry and the rest is what solves that problem if you think it's a problem. The ability to absorb massive amounts of data that averaged, you know, current databases and human beings weren't able. It's like the war on terror conversation, right? And the idea that the claim being that they had so much data that they just couldn't see until after the fact. They could look back and go, oh, now we can see. We didn't know where to look, right? Well, that's what this arguably, in one case, solves. And think about the power that comes along with that. As Corbett wrote a long time ago, data is the new oil. And it's been that way for a long time.
We didn't know how to obtain it, or we obtained it in very draconian ways, right? We were all there. I remember sitting in Somalia as a young captain, maybe 7, 8 years in the Army. I got there the night before. The next day, we're in this firefight, and somebody comes and gets me and says, hey, sir, the Pentagon's on the phone for you. I said, for me? I'm Captain Perna. Yeah, they asked for you by name. So I get on the phone as Brigadier General. Hey, I need you to tell me the status of the equipment in Somalia. I mean, literally, you could hear rifle bullets going, right? And so I said, hey, nope, no excuses, answer the question. I said, okay. And I rattled off about 10 pieces of equipment and the readiness rates. The guy sitting next to me says, sir, how'd you do that? You didn't even see a piece of paper. I said, hey, you know what? He has no clue. And I know I was close enough, right? To fast forward, right, to here we are in Operation Warp Speed, and I have access to all the information I might need.
Just think about that transition. So if we're looking at what's happening now, it's just as likely that Operation Warp Speed was just one aspect of what's currently being built. And maybe the injection was a different experiment. Maybe that was a whole ploy. Maybe it was all a big, you know, red herring to get us. I mean, I don't think that, but consider that Operation Warp Speed was very clearly one part of this data mining operation that started a long time ago.
And this is so crucial, okay? This is really a crucial point, because when we took over in...
Here's the quote. Palantir was referred to by General Gus Perna, the CEO of Operation Warp Speed, as I said, i.e. the COVID bioweapon jab program, as such a great teammate. Perna notes that during Operation Warp Speed, he had access to all the information that he might need. So why is that okay? We were promised that wouldn't be the case, but it turns out they were using your data, which, by the way, they always lie to you. It's not like they were played and Trump or Biden didn't know. Guys, they're always lying to you, in my opinion. This was the deliberate point. They're going to tell you we won't do that, and they're probably already doing that. They were accessing your personal data all the way back then, or well before that, I'm sure. Now, here's a post that somebody shared with me as Maria Senderholm. This is just somebody that had some clips they were sharing underneath something else they tagged me with I thought were interesting. Just to include these, this is a clip from James Corbett pointing out the overlap of total information awareness. Also has the image that we talked about yesterday. So in case you want to see that image, here's the actual logo of what was total information awareness, a CIA program that got scrapped and then became Palantir. That's how this works out.
Information Awareness Office, which I've talked about a number of times, perhaps most notably in the 5 Privacies You Didn't Know You Lost episode of the Corbett Report. But yes, the one with the creepy Illuminati pyramid radiating the globe image. Just totally nothing to worry about here, guys. Anyway, this should bring to mind also some other things we've talked about in the past, like Zbigniew Brzezinski's Between Two Ages. Mm-hmm. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and maintain up-to-date complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities.
Take a second to reflect on how crazy that is. Now, that's an old, what is it, the 60s, 70s when he wrote that? Probably, I think it's the 70s. The point is that around that time frame, Zbigniew Brzezinski was the driving force behind the balkanization of the Middle East and all these different plans that later were carried out. So you could argue that all the way back then that this was still the objective, that what's happening now. He's the title is America's Role in the Technotronic Era. Derek and Whitney and plenty of others have mentioned him in that very point. Or, or ignoring the Elon Musk relative overlap to Technocracy Inc. I mean, it just doesn't get more obvious right now. And so when that's the point, and the argument becomes that this was all building in that direction, I mean, and again, it's rarely, if ever, just one thing. But when you can see that central thread that connects these things, it's at least worth considering that was a long-term objective that has evolved and changed and different events have happened, but here we are.
In the technotronic society, the trend would seem to be towards the aggregation of the individual support of millions of uncoordinated citizens, easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities, exploiting the latest communications techniques to manipulate emotions and control reason.
There you go. That's the social media overlap. It's right in your face.
So there you have it, guys. The day LifeLog was announced dead was the day that Facebook launched. And the idea rolls on, and think about how much closer we are to that LifeLog idea coming to full fruition 14 years.
That's the other part of this, by the way, that's LifeLog and Facebook. I mean, it's what in our lives is, I mean, the question really has to become like, what isn't being manipulated at this point?
Years later than we were back when we were also innocent at that time when Facebook was just being launched, or so we would like to believe. Anyway, there's a lot to dig into, so I hope you guys will continue researching about LifeLog and its various analogs in the different programs that have been suggested and quote-unquote scrapped by DARPA, like the Total Information Awareness Office, which we know just went underground and became the whole PRISM grid network. So all of this moves on just under different names, and they don't tend to announce it quite as openly anymore, but there's a lot to dig into. Right. Hope you guys will be there to dig into it with me. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.
If you guys aren't supporting and watching James Corbett, you absolutely should. Now, here's another clip they shared, and this is going into the kind of DARPA side overlap with the CIA and just kind of what they're focusing on.
Your educational background?
I have an MBA from Dartmouth, a Master's of Science from Harvard, PhD in Applied Sciences, Computer Science, Artificial Intelligence, pre-medical in engineering, and other classes from Stanford, Duke, and MIT. So yeah, I've been in school most of my life.
And how did you get into working with DARPA and the CIA?
Well, it was odd. I gave a resume to a headhunter, ironically, and they're called headhunters, and my head was taken for a CIA think tank. At the time, I didn't know it. It was a technology think tank.
That's really important to think about. How much of today are people not even aware in mainstream alternative media, social media, that they don't even realize that they are tapped and wrapped into some kind of an operation that's designed and never even seen as such? I think that's most of what happens today.
And it was all funded by DARPA, and then I got shuffled around as a scientist to these various other projects.
For people who aren't familiar, could you tell us what DARPA is?
Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. They do all of the pie in the sky projects, long-term, well-funded. I have some of the best scientists, and it's mainly where all the top secret research goes on. And that some of it I can talk about, some of it I can't. And it's a very fine line. I'm not trying to hurt my country. I'm not trying to hurt anyone here. But
yeah, maybe you're not, but some of them are, if not all of them. I mean, that's the thing important. Whether your intentions are good or not, that your knowledge and work is being used by a shadowy government entity that's been doing bad things to us for a long time.
There is a cover-up going on about the Havana syndrome.
So that's a different topic, but that's the whole Cuba and that, that we're talking, and that's where that point came in the past about the, direct energy stuff, about the what's the other, like sonar and all these different weapon types. They're used and tested and manipulated all over the place. That's a different conversation, but it's worth going into yourself as well. Now, here's where he continues talking about the same conversation.
Do you think, do you know if Elon has any sort of government contracts with Neuralink?
No, as far as I know, he does not.
Okay.
He'll be approached, obviously, but what I think they're doing, like some of the projects I worked on in my time at DARPA, became real big companies like Google and Facebook and et cetera. So I think it's a technology transfer. They can help civilian scientists, come up with the ideas to make it look like it's new.
In other words, you could say take advantage of them, right? Or this is the same model we see from the Israel Unit 8200 overlap, right?
And not the other way around, that the universities came up with it, and then it's then they bought it from them. So
it's important to see that kind of pipeline and how that works. Now, here is the overlap we highlighted before of XAI from DARPA becoming XAI Twitter. And actually, I should have just grabbed that one too, but they also don't forget that then, which I argue was just more of a window dressing change of scenery, Elon Musk says he sold X to XAI, which it's really just, I think we've all been involved in the same ongoing thing. And this is just normalized, like without, if they just came out and told you we're using a CIA DARPA program, you can talk to your friends, nobody would do it. But the reality is they get you in, it's sort of like the phone and the rest of it, right? Where you wonder if it was always just about getting something on you where you could always be listened to or something like that. Either way, the point is he sold it, it became XAI. That's what you're dealing with. It's an AI dynamic, it's social media, it's all at the same time. I think that's what it was to begin with. So that's another example of DARPA, CIA, government becoming something they pretend is an independent idea. And of course, then Musk and XAI overlap with Palantir, which is not secret at all. Now, this is just another kind of extension of this that goes into the same guy talking about the AI the point that goes beyond just the surveillance but like into the next level, or maybe it's hard to say, it's probably already going on, but the idea of like voice of God kind of stuff, being able to direct voices into your mind, which by the way is a very real thing. It's like the heart attack gun. People still pretend like it's not real. It's been verifiably proven. They've had to admit it in previous examples, but here brings it into the AI field.
Can use this artificial intelligence voice in the head to break down the ego and control an individual.
Ultimately, yes. You can't plug your eardrums. You can't stop the sound. A lot of the targets are tricked into believing evil aliens have abducted their brains. Demons.
They're tricked.
Yes.
How are they tricked?
They're told.
By who?
By the voices. A lot of these school shootings, I think that you hear about on the news, they hear voices.
We've learned that Cruz told the BSO detective that he heard a demon in his head.
And police now say he also heard voices.
Who heard voices in his head.
By the way, it's hard not to overlap this with the argument of, what Jones just said, Gates is a demon. Again, I really legitimately would never flatly dismiss it. Anything is worth investigation, just in case. The funny thing is to see the kind of synergy between a lot of these manipulators right now and how it's just interesting where this all goes.
Scripts, they're called. And they're meant to confuse the very derogatory. That's just typical breakdown. And why would you want to break down the ego of that person? To rebuild it. So this gets into creating Manchurian candidates.
Police have released video made by the man who opened fire at Florida State University.
In Project Soulcatch, I referred to a Myron May as a psycho bomb. They didn't care who the target was. They were just trying to make him explode and do something bad. He was a lawyer trained there. His reasoning why he shot up the school was he needed news publicity to make sure people understood this was real. And he left a video testimony.
As sick as this may sound, I've even had stalkers follow me into church.
He believed government stalkers were harassing him and using a direct energy weapon to hurt him.
But he gave out 7 packages in the mail, and the FBI intercepted them all.
What were in these packages?
Just information. Just information.
May then opened fire at an FSU library, wounding 3 people. He was killed in a shootout with police.
If these people do explode and do something bad like this, there's absolutely no way to prove that there has been any sort of manipulation to the brain. In this guy's case, he talked about it. I mean, obviously he talked,
but it was covered up.
He's
by
the way they write the article. He sounds like a crazy person.
Yeah. Now, there's obviously 2 ways to look at this, right? One is that's, the kind of confirmation of the social engineering, predictive programming, letting you know about something that's been going on for a long time for whatever that's supposed to prime you for next. It's also worth considering that he's just making all of this up to get you in a very clear position for kind of the same reason, but using falsehoods. That's how we have to look at all this stuff. The CIA, that's how they operate, guys. And the interesting thing, though, is that there's some of this stuff that's really hard to miss. Again, it's always possible that all of this is some kind of manufactured manipulation, the idea of things like nanotechnology, but it behooves us to not dismiss it either, to consider the possibilities and whether or not that is what's actually happening. So on that same note, here's a clip from James Giordano from the U.S. government. And it's the same kind of conversation, but extending this even further about potentially using nanotechnology with artificial intelligence and what that might accomplish. Now, this is all just because this connects in my mind. I've gone much deeper on the idea of smart dust or any one of these individual points. Today, we're going to get right back to the larger conversation we're having, but this was just important to consider because I just want people to see the real implications of where this might already be, if not be going.
The way the notogram works is fascinating because it takes each one of these domains not as circles, but as spheres. And the contribution to that sphere is the acquisition of both prior as well as real-time data. All of these data, historical.
And of course, can't miss that. That in the top of everything else he's going to get into, the idea that these things are still relaying data. That seems to be the obvious common thread.
Historical data, phenomic data. In other words, what is the physical prior as well as real-time data? All of these data, historical data, phenomic data. In other words, what is the physical nature of you? Genotypic data. What is not only your genome and your genetics, but those of your historical family, those of those individuals who may influence your epigenome. In other words, what are your ecological and genetic interfaces? What are your medical economics? What are you buying at the drugstore? What prescriptions do you have? How are you using your social media, your public media? What are you reading? What are you downloading? What are you looking at your computer? What are your various contacts, both personally and professionally, and then ultimately using all of these to track your behaviors and from them map your cognitions in real time. In real time. A colleague who I work with, and I don't use this word ever cavalierly, truly a genius, named Professor Ophir Frieder at Georgetown, has taken the idea of the von Mueller notogram and has utilized this for a way of naked person tracking. So if you know anything about human terrain teams in this dimension, in the DoD dimension or in the IC dimension, whether it's Title 50 or Title 10 applications, you know that one of the most difficult things is naked person tracking. How do we literally follow somebody without having identifiable characteristics that we can tag?
Oh, well, look at that. That seems to be partly what Palantir is working on with the drones. Motions, clothing, eye features, movements of the body. I'm telling you guys, there's a common thread to all of this.
Several years ago, our research group developed something called Titan, which was tiered integrative tag and analytic networks. But you still needed a tag. You still had to put something on that individual to be able to know where they were. Chip them the way you would your kitty cat or your dog. Now, can we do that? Yeah, we can. And all conspiracy theories aside about what happened yesterday on your cell phone, graphenes and nanobots aside, the truth of it is that we can. The real issue is we can introduce nanomaterials to you, to individuals, in a rather inconspicuous, if not clandestine, if not covert way.
Make sure you heard that. Introducing aspects of the conversation, whether we're talking, just to be clear on that, whether we're talking nanotechnology or just nanoparticulates. The point is ways to, and what he's discussing here is nanotechnology, but the idea of getting this to you in conspicuous ways, or rather, inconspicuous ways. He has been, this very person, James Giordano, called this out during the COVID-19 dynamic. And he said they were using neuroweapons and neuroscience during that time frame. That's what this overlaps with.
That are then trackable across domains and dimensions from the cloud and or from a satellite. But we still have to introduce the nanomaterials to you. Are there ways to do that? Yes. Some of them remain on the high side, some of them not so much, because this is now getting out into the public domain.
So on that note, just think it's very important that he was talking about this. We'll include the one that I briefly mentioned, what I couldn't grab off the fly, was this conversation of the patent from Wells Fargo, which is literally a Wells Fargo patent, current assignee, that talks about, and it's literally titled Smart Dust Usage. And it says systems and methods that facilitate authenticating a user making a payment using microelectromechanical systems, MEMS or MEMs devices, i.e. smart dust. The MEM's device may have sensors that collect data and transfer it to the base station device. You could look through this. It's literally talking about like an ATM that spits these things out and is able to confirm who you are using MEMS or smart dust. It's just so very clear that this is something that is at least on the table, if not already been used for a very long time. And that's why I discussed this in depth. Oh, this is the show, in case you want to watch that, about that Wells Fargo point, smart dust financial tracking. But also just this larger point I reference usually, this is smart dust already in the use of the population? It was COVID-19, in quotes, an attempted experimental next step. I think absolutely. The provable reality of what this stuff is, it's so clear. As we talk about even dust networks going back a decade, or the symposium on this very point, that I can even just play that one small clip of it that goes back to 20 years ago that DARPA was working on these things. And this does overlap with the idea of relaying information, of using your body's own energy, all of which is very, very possible.
You can literally scatter this stuff like dust or embed it into a sheet of paper. This was commercially released 10 years ago. It's a tiny computer, and it features data processing, data storage, wireless comms, and it's probably as close to the true smart dust vision from the early DARPA days as we've come so far. They're designed to harvest energy from the environment around them and to communicate via a mesh network.
Very interesting. Okay, so I'll include that for you to look further into. Now, on that note, I wanted to include this, which we really didn't poke into yesterday. Like all of what we're discussing, always just consider whether it might be a falsehood. Maybe that's a manufactured narrative to get you going in a certain direction. Never have we claimed that's not possible. But on top of that, in the same way here, this very well may be the idea that drives you to think that this is real or possible when it's actually not. That's an argument that Whitney's made more than once, and I think it's well worth your time. That, whatever the possibility that it's something worth considering, that maybe this is all a big grift, or maybe the idea is that they've realized they're never actually capable of reaching, like a sentient general intelligence idea. But that's up in the air, it seems. It seems likely with what's going on, that's where they're at least aiming for. But yet we keep seeing reports like this. This one is from 2 days ago. OpenAI's, quote, smartest AI model was explicitly told to shut down, and it refused. Or the one we talked about that was essentially trying to blackmail people behind it because they were trying to change this or shut that down. To me, it's part of me wants to just believe that can't be true. It's like, that's a lie to get us scared. But obviously it's possible. And the idea that we would ever keep going in this direction when stuff like that is happening, or under a bill that allowed 10 years of no oversight of this very thing, is just shockingly stupid, if not an agenda for very clear objectives at your expense, or no matter who it harms, is the point. So on that note, to go over into the Israel conversation, to finish with the point about the aid massacre, I pointed this out earlier, which I think is interesting. I posted this yesterday after the show. I said, to add to what I discussed tonight, which was yesterday, in the deal Hamas reached with last week with Witkoff, they agreed to hand over governance of Gaza to an independent, this is a quote, Palestinian technocratic committee. It's everywhere. A technocratic committee. Hard to miss what's going on right now. Really crazy. Oh, how did I end up with just the TLAV link? That's weird. Is that another? Whatever. I don't even know how that's possible. Sure, that's not a weird. There. Anyway, the point is clearly that Ryan Grimm is referencing the another fake ceasefire conversation. We're going to get to in a minute. And one of the most important things that we're going to touch on, I think that was early. Maybe not. Oh, I get, that's where I see I moved it over there. We'll get to it in a second. This is the point about the deal has always been about Hamas has to go. And if that doesn't happen, we're never going to. Okay, well, guess what? Hamas has recently been repeatedly including that they will completely disarm and completely be taken out of the picture. And Israel and the U.S. have twice denied the deal and forced that back in. It's easily verifiable. We'll go into it in a minute, which the obvious point needs to be made. That they need Hamas, like they have been funding them into reality, like we've talked about, as he said, or even Haaretz reported that they funded them to keep them divided. So that obviously allows complicity involvement with what happened in any context involving Hamas. But the reality being that they clearly are now fighting to maintain that they stay because that is the rationale for why they keep continuing. Clearly there could be another logical reason, but that seems like an obvious, likely candidate. We'll come back to that. But my point here is simply the idea that they're going to hand over Gaza to a technocratic committee. Just like they're not even trying to hide it, it seems. Now, last point is on this segment before we go into a conversation about Israel and surveillance, before we go to the rest of it, Leo Terrell says, we will eliminate anti-Semitism. Yet another member of the government that clearly is screaming that I don't care about your constitutional rights. And it says, by that, he means they're going to have Palantir create a profile for every American who criticizes Israel, and then they're going to shut them out of society via deplatforming and debanking. Sure seems like that's where it's going. Now, on that very point about the surveillance overlap, you might find this, you might find it surprising. Personally, I think this is right on the key, on brand. Craig Murray points out that Israel is no longer hiding its use of blackmail to control Western politicians and media. This is about material from the Pegasus phone spyware to blackmail the Spanish prime minister. But the Epstein operation and probably the Glenn Greenwald videos, all part of the same scheme. Now, if you haven't seen that, honestly, it is the only important part of the Glenn Greenwald discussion is to recognize that somebody did that to silence him. And not only is he pushing back even harder, just not even flinching. Respect for that. The bottom line is the guy is he's publicly a gay person. He's never hided who he in that regard that he is a gay person. And the idea that they would then put out a video of a consensual sexual act with somebody, regardless of how embarrassing it is, and act like that in any way changes the conversation only works for children and just lowbrow moronic people and Zionists. The people out there that are going, the leader of moral authority. It's like, yeah, so somebody who is screaming that we should be killing children is the one criticizing somebody else for lack of moral authority. It's insane how desperate they are right now. But the point is, what you should care about is the truth of what Glenn is highlighting, not what they're trying to distract you from. But this is important to understand that what he's highlighting is this is a bigger operation. And I actually do believe it makes the most sense that was done from some Zionist organization, like a Batar USA, by the way. But this is about the prime minister of Spain. And he's highlighting the fact that he is being threatened by Israel with Pegasus revelations, no less, which is what we've already talked about more than once, which is the NSO group. All these different overlaps we've talked about, the Trump administration is now allowing to flourish in this country. And that is spyware. Even examples showing you that they were caught recently, as Derek covered, for a massive hack of WhatsApp users. That's the same technology we're talking about. So this is really important to understand. Now, here is I think a reason why this happens. There's plenty of obvious points to make, but in May 15th, the Spanish prime minister calls Israel a genocidal state. Yeah, I'm sure that had nothing to do with the floating of the idea that we're going to release information on you. But here's the report from, I think this is a translated article. It's a Spanish one. It says, Sanchez fears revenge by Israel using the stolen information with Pegasus. Here is a translated report from somebody in Spain saying Israel responds to the government of Spain. Israel warning warning to Pedro Sanchez's government. We have more than enough material to destroy the Spanish government. We know everything that happened in Actoca, and we know everything that Pedro Sanchez spoke about with Mohammed VI, among other things. So all they're basically doing is we're going to expose things about you and not even trying to hide that. That seems like a desperate thing to me. Well, let's not forget that in general, this is 2022, NSO Pegasus spyware was already used against Spanish leaders. I think it shows you either a mix of hubris and desperation, but also just maybe they think they can get away with it. History has seemed to let them think that. But just as Craig Murray points out, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. NSO Group, Pegasus software, all these different things are rapidly being deployed. And these things overlap with the same groups we're talking about, with Palantir and the rest, guys. I think you very well we should consider whether it's all part of the same thing. So as we reported back on April 21st, 2025, the Great Palantir Reset. But this was about the same kind of conversation, but the focus with the time was about how immigration was being used to roll this out. So on that note, let's talk about that overlap. Aaron Melnick from the American Immigration Council points out, and this overlaps with the same surveillance conversation. But of course, as usual, under the guise of going after the evil, bad immigrants, which in some cases they very well may be. But it applies to everybody. And it says, in the alleged land of the free, your failure to have a social media account or your decision to keep that account private can and will be used against you. No Facebook, Instagram, X account, you're probably hiding something, according to the Trump administration, so no visa for you. Now, yes, it starts with the visa program. As I said before, I'm of the mind that the government's not required to give visas to anybody. There's no, they can just choose to say, no, I don't want you in this country. But we already know, well, of course, the first part is once they're in this country with a visa, they have constitutional rights like anybody else, which is a provable fact. Even illegal immigrants, yes, they do. It's provable. Reno versus Flores and plenty of other Supreme Court rulings and plenty of other Supreme Court judges have including Scalia, have said that, proving that's the reality. But point is, these always build the boiling frog, right? So what this is cementing is the idea that, well, you need to have, like we saw with X in general, we're going to get rid of the anonymous dynamic, except for all the bots you use, right? That they're going to drive into the idea that we have to focus on people that are not using social media. So they want everybody on these platforms or that are keeping it private. It's about data. And this is just one more aspect of it. As we talked about, the immigration OS is one angle of all of this. That's Palantir rolling this out under the guise of fighting immigration. On top of that, May 30th, ICE illegally gains informal access to the nationwide license plate camera network. You see how just one step at a time, this is encroaching, growing. This behemoth is becoming, I don't even know how at this point we're able to walk this back right away. And this is from, Orwell just shared this. This is from the 30th. Remove your name tag. Email appears to direct troopers, police, to take off their nameplates when working with ICE. Yeah, sure. Pretty clear that they're totally not doing anything wrong when they mask up, don't have warrants, don't identify themselves, and even tell police, who, by the way, just like them, are required to identify themselves, that they don't have to. I guess when the president says it's not illegal, right? Isn't that what Nixon told us? My God, guys, wake up. It's so shockingly clear what's going on, and it's not left or right. It's just government. Another note on that, and we're on the immigration point. As Melnick points out, and this I agree with him. This is one of the parts that really gets me. It shows you that they're also not focusing on the people they claim they are, but that they are going after people that are going to their legal meetings. Some cases, citizenship, like this MAGA supporter, which we just recently talked about. He was just denied bail, despite the fact that he's a proud MAGA supporter and is actively. Joe Biden should be impeached. We're just talking about this, but that shouldn't really matter. But it might for those that think that there's somehow only illegal, immigrants with certain skin color or people that look like that should end up in this position. But he was grabbed because of a 2015 paperwork miscommunication. And at that time, they had a stillbirth, and that's logically why they missed something. And ever since then, they've been going to meetings, and no one's cared until suddenly they used that while he went to his final meeting for citizenship. Or it was a green card. Either way, going through the process of getting and at the time, because he's going through that process, he is in this country legally. And they yank him and put him in prison. He's been there for what? When did we talk about this? May 22nd? His wife's in the middle of a dangerous pregnancy, apparently. And the whole bottom line is, how does that make sense to you? Is this the worst of the worst that no one wants you to believe they're going after? Or is this just another name on a list? Did he say something about Israel? I mean, I don't know. But if you're okay with this, then there's something wrong with you. Not only is this illegal, it violates everything you claim you hold sacred, and it's also just wrong what you're doing to people for no reason. So same thing here. You've got families showing up to their hearings, whether for a visa, whether for citizenship, green card, or asylum, which despite what you may want to think about it, if you don't agree with it, sure, let's have that conversation. It is currently the law. Like with the last administration where they brought a lot of people in under that process and then Trump just said no and removed them all and called them all illegal aliens. Not a single, they were all here legally because of that process. They're just not being honest with you. But a lot of the people that are cheering this on don't really care about the facts. In this case, another family, a family showing up with this kid. I think I forget, they said his age somewhere in here. You know, he's a young teenager, zip-tied. And he says, what infuriates me so much about this operation is that it is literally punishing people for following the rules and showing up to their court hearings. Now, in some cases, yes, these are hearings about possible deportation, but the reality is they don't need that. Like if they're going to be deported anyway, that's what's so frustrating about this. The problem that Milnick and myself and others have called out is that many of them are there for actual proceedings to have a visa, like we said, green card, actual citizenship, or asylum. In many cases from places that are suffering because of U.S. foreign policy. Either way, it says it is so toxic to the basic concept of following the rules. ICE itself is effectively encouraging people to violate the law. Sort of sounds like a Israel anti-Semitism kind of circular logic, right? Where they use this to drive people to break the law so they can go arrest them even more. It's kind of hard not to see. He says, these children are dangerous criminals, says Secretary Noem. Be honest with the American public. You've ordered ICE to go after the lowest possible hanging fruit, the easiest targets, who are by definition not the dangerous criminals. They're people like this showing up to court. Hard to think the worst of the worst are showing up for their scheduled court hearings, right? Oh, I thought I wasn't going to play it, but here's just her clip saying as they continue to double down on, we're going after the rapists and the terrorists. Well, every single thing you can possibly see to prove right now shows you that by and large, the vast majority of people, the entire thing have been non-criminals, no criminal record here legally. Yes, there have been criminals that have been sent, including one we'll point to in a second, which seems to be they've dropped the charges to send him away because it seems he worked with Bukele, a gang member. But those are okay. Or the fact that they're working with a cartel member from Mexico and making deals with him. But that's okay, though, because that's what they want, right? No, it's called hypocrisy. You're removing people who are here legally because you don't like their skin color, but then you're making deals with cartel members. We'll get to that. It should outrage you if they're telling you we're removing the worst and then making deals with the worst. Now, this came out with ProPublica. Trump administration knew the vast majority of Venezuelans sent to Salvadorian prison had not been convicted of U.S. crime. Now, on the main point that's made with that is, well, maybe they didn't have criminal records, but they were here illegally. Oh, if that was the case, then I agree that even if they have no criminal record, they still broke the law by being here illegally. Now, that's arguing somebody snuck into this country, not somebody who's here and waiting for their hearing to get a visa or waiting for their hearing to get an asylum claim. Not the same thing, but they are conflating that more than anything. Not even conflating it, they're lying about it. But this is on top of the fact that the majority of them not only had not been convicted of U.S. crimes, but they were here legally in this country. That just kills me that we can't be honest about even that. And this is the show I did on that, April 1st. Trump deportations revealed to be full of innocent people, and then accentuating the point, legal immigrants with no criminal record. Like I was going back and forth with someone online like yesterday or today, and it's the same kind of thing. Where I say that, I was like, no, they weren't breaking the law. I said, well, they did when they crossed the border. I said, no, they were here legally and no record. Like, well, how can they have no record if they crossed the border illegally? It's like, you're not listening to me. It's like, but either it's a bot trying to frustrate you, but I do know there's an element to that conversation that like just can't wrap their mind around this because they've just enshrined whatever the idiot Miller said that day, without any research or any investigation. And I really hope you'll look into this point. Because as far as I can tell, he's still currently in jail. And he didn't, I can't even see where he broke the law. Having a miscommunication over a document from 2015 and following suit ever since, and literally having meetings where they confirm everything and keep going, and then arguing that he should be in jail for that now. I mean, there's a reason that not a single MAGA person has ever talked about this. Not that I can see, because there's no way to rationalize that. You have to toe the line. They're a bunch of evil terrorists, raping murderers, and MS-13 gang members. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. And doesn't that just then show you that you have to lie to maintain it? Here's some examples of people on top of all the ones we've already shown you. The teens that have been sent to El Salvador despite having no record and being in this country legally, the adults in the same camp, the American citizens that have been sent, the children that were almost sent, the ones that were deported, over and on and on and on. In this case, here's a U.S. citizen who is at a construction site, a video circulating of ICE officers wrestling a Hispanic construction worker, I guess arguably because he's Hispanic. That's all they need. To the ground, where he repeatedly says, I'm a U.S. citizen. Cut to the chase, he was released because guess what? He's a U.S. citizen. Shouldn't they work that out before they wrestle him to the ground? And really ask yourself, what is the logic? Was it hearsay? Did somebody say something? Did you think he's Hispanic, so he must be an immigrant? I mean, you guys, you have to understand how flimsy this has been. ICE has been deliberately lying about stories like that kid from Texas they claimed crossed the border illegally. And then what's her name from his administration said, well, no, he's a legal immigrant, but he was already in Texas, both of which were wrong, and he got proven to be a U.S. citizen. Why did they both lie about it? Because they both seem to consciously be aware that they're manufacturing a very dishonest agenda. Then how else do you make sense of that? So this video simply showing you somebody yells, that's illegal. Yeah. I mean, he's not even resisting. He put his hand up. Wild. So he says the video circulating shows that he reportedly detained for hours until he was eventually released. Tim Marshall says, so why is fighting with ICE? Simply go with them until the discrepancy's cleared up. You see how the idiocy. You mean like the people that did that and got sent to El Salvador despite them being legally in this country and having no criminal record? Yeah, just go along with the Gestapo that doesn't identify themselves and has no warrant because it'll all work out in your best interest. I can't even believe, I can because Tim here probably doesn't even know that's the case. Probably would die fighting me against, that's not true. It's only been rapists and murderers and MS-13 members. You can see it on their knuckles, right? That's the kind of person we're arguing with. This person says, F you, just because he isn't white, they can't do that. He says, no, they can do it. No, they can do it to anyone. Do what you're told and it'll be cleared up. Right. So his argument is, if you got nothing to hide, then it shouldn't be a problem. Right? What every government of the world wants their lackey sycophants to say out loud. A bootlicker is what you used to call it. How embarrassing. Well, how about another point? There was a U.S. citizen, this is on the May 23rd, who had a real ID. He had the new real ID. He complied right up to the main point. And he was handcuffed and held in immigration raid before finally being released. So apparently not even, what it says is the man told him that his authorities took his ID from his wallet, told him that it was fake before handcuffing him. Like these people aren't even up to date on what the current IDs they're pushing on you are. They're going, that's a fake ID. We're looking at, so nothing is sacred here, guys. They're going after anyone they want with no justification. It's been that way from the very beginning. I still don't think this has anything to do with what they claim it does. Here's a clip that'll probably upset you. Here, this is a Georgetown scholar, Badar Khan Suri. You've heard them discuss this. Just what you probably don't hear from the people lying about every part of these stories, like Noam claiming people are illegal aliens when you can prove they're not. He had, I think it's a J1 visa. So he was here legally on a visa. He didn't have citizenship, but he was in this country legally with a visa because of his job. Listen to what they did to this man.
You were detained for nearly 2 months. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that experience.
2 months. 2 months. Just wait.
I was teaching my class that day, and when I reached my home, I saw an unmarked car driving dangerously, was about to hit me. And then when I was about to reach my door, they just blocked me, and this guy with masked, he was masked, and he jumped out of the car as if he was some militia and asked me, am I brother? I said, yes. And next thing he said was, I was under arrest. I was devastated. I was terrified.
And you were...
Note the Palestinian flag pin he's got. And I know you'll understand why this is happening.
Detained in a facility in Virginia, then Louisiana, and then finally in Texas. And some of those transfers happened in the middle of the night.
And you know why those transfers happened? Because they were trying to keep one step ahead of the Supreme Court or the court rulings that were telling them to release these people. And they would jump from place to place. They would circumvent the Texas legislature. I mean, or rather the rulings. Now, I'm not going to speak to their exact knowledge of, or intentions around his exact move, but that is why they were doing this in a lot of these locations. We were already reported on that. They were moving and shuttling groups around because they were ordered to release them in that jurisdiction. So they moved to Louisiana. That's why Ozturk and the rest were sent there, because they're places that were amenable to what they wanted to accomplish. It's just corrupt, guys. It's corrupt from the top down.
Allegedly because of overcrowding.
They just kidnapped me and disappeared me and was pushing me from one detention center to other. My hands, my wrist, my body was chained, shackled, and treating me like an animal, dehumanizing me in every possible way. I was feeling humiliated, and ultimately, when I reached Texas, it was a very extremely overcrowded place.
Mafez, as Butter said, he was arrested outside of your home. What was the first night like after he was arrested?
So that night was a terrifying night for me. I remember myself, I slept behind the door. I was afraid that someone will come and pick up my children and take them away from me like they did for Butter. So it was terrifying. I was crying because the ceasefire ends in Gaza and the war started again. I was trying to reach my family in Gaza and I couldn't for some time. Then when I talked with my mother, her voice was breaking, and then she was crying. I was crying for many reasons, crying about my husband and the people who have been killed in Gaza.
And can you describe what it was like when Butter was finally released and was able to return home?
The moment I saw him, the soul returned to my body. And that moment, it wasn't the moment for me. It is the moment for hundreds of supporters who was with me that moment. They were chanting on his name, 1, 2, 3, Butter is free. They share with us this joy. I was proud to be his wife and the mother of his children.
Now, there are people that will simply try to rationalize why that's okay just because of the way she looks. And if you don't understand right now that that is a driving force along with what's happening right now, being seeded from the Zionist racist mentality, I don't know how else to explain it. It's very clear how you can draw a map and show how these things have been used, or the Israeli government has used these divisive tactics in other genocides like Rwanda or Bosnia. And it's how this works. And right now, I think we are being focused on. And it has been for a long time. The bottom line is, regardless of what you think drove this, you should be outraged. This is what happened in this country based on the things that you think this country is supposed to be like. In every possible way. This was a violation of everything we hold sacred. And they said they denied him contact with his attorney. Because you think that somehow these things just don't exist because you claim you're fighting something you're not? Alien Enemies Act doesn't matter, guys. These things are constitutionally enshrined, and these people don't care about that. The America First administration is destroying the one thing that holds this place together. And it says it wouldn't even let him speak with his wife. He says one should at this time show courage because courage is also contagious. We need to break the cycle of the chilling effect. Couldn't agree more. Now, this part is scary, but also hilarious at the same time if it wasn't so serious. Even Twitter has now fact-checked their claim. Now, what I think this story is somebody else out there taking advantage of the belligerent nature of what they're doing. It could be that, or it could just be that they're all on the same line. But the point is that you know that they are acting irrationally. They're not checking things. They're looking at a Batar tweet and then deporting somebody. You're trying to based on one tweet from a Zionist group. A court of law called that out on record and said it appears the only thing that Noam and the rest were using was this one tweet that turned out to be false. That's on the record. The guy was released. So if you can at least, I mean, let's just even say you think that everything else was good and that was the one mistake, you have to acknowledge they're making mistakes. And then that means you have to be clear about the fact that there shouldn't be that allowed. There should be due process. And it's all the obvious that people that just don't want to acknowledge this are trying to pretend like it doesn't apply here because they're X, Y, and Z. Yes, it does. Because of exactly things like this, or the teen that was almost sent, or the American that was almost, or the teen that was sent to El Salvador. The point is that somebody reached out and made a case about this guy, saying he was basically trying to get Nome in this process to deport him. Turns out he did, or I'm skipping the part, is that the letter came in that was supposed to be, they allege was a threat to Donald Trump's life. And this letter was allegedly from him. So they arrested him and tried to deport him. Turns out in the investigation that he didn't write the letter. Apparently, he can't even write in English in the first place. And on top of that, that ultimately the person who was trying to, who I guess robbed him and he was suing them, was the person trying to get him deported because that case was about to come into court. I mean, so if it looks the way it appears is somebody who was trying to take advantage of the frivolous deportations to get somebody who was innocent out of the way before he could make this person go to jail for robbing or whatever. We'll read through it. It's just wild, regardless of the validity of whether that was the intention, because I can't speak to that. They lied about this, and apparently all you need is a fake letter and an allegation, and then you can be deported. But we already know this, seeing as how they've deported people for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Aaron says, oh my God, CNN just broke this story. And I saw it on the New Republic. We'll talk about that next. The investigators believe the guy below did not send this letter. In fact, it was apparently sent by a guy in jail for robbing the guy they're trying to deport, who wants to get him deported before he's out of trial or put on trial. It's crazy. Now, again, here is Nome's tweet. Thanks to our ICE officers, this illegal alien who threatened to assassinate President Trump is behind bars. This threat comes not even a year after President Trump was shot in Butler. I'm basically saying, oh, you guys should, all politicians and members of the media should take notice and stop driving these kind of rhetoric. Secretary Nome has fallen for a hoax. Mr. Reyes did not write this letter. A man who is currently awaiting trial for allegedly assaulting and robbing Mr. Reyes wrote the letter, sent it to ICE to get him deported, and they just blindly followed suit because they're ridiculous. And my gut tells me that's the kind of, Nome would just fall for that because that's how flimsy this is right now. But what's crazy to me is that this guy was also not here illegally. We'll go into that. In fact, what I believe it was the process, I think it was in this article. Yeah, it's right here. A strange turn of events followed the arrest of Ramon Morales Reyes, a 54-year-old Mexican-born man who was living in Milwaukee as he sought a U visa, a type of visa available to victims of crimes. Now, again, same point, regardless of whether you think that's legitimate or not. It is the current law. So the reality is, as he's in the process of that, he is here legally. It doesn't matter. I mean, at least be honest enough to say that I don't agree with that and then make that why you're arguing. To argue somehow that that's just not true, you're lying. It's easy to prove. Or that somehow that shouldn't be applied. Well, okay, then that should be the next argument. It shouldn't be yanked out of this guy's hands because you don't like what's currently happening. It is the legal reality. It's just so frustrating. We're dealing with such dishonest people. So here's the New Republic. Investigators say ICE Barbie Kristi Noem's latest arrest was a setup. Homeland Security Kristi Noem celebrated the arrest of a Mexican man she claimed made a threat against Donald Trump's life. Now, by the way, another alternative is that they manufactured it themselves to keep the whole assassination narrative going. Who knows? But it goes on to say, in a post on Wednesday, Noem lauded the arrest of the 54-year-old that they are wrongly arresting, alleging that he'd sent a letter to immigration, to ICE, as well as several other federal agencies. And again, one of the main points the investigators are finding is that he can't even write in English. It's just ridiculous. All politicians and members of the media should take notice, she says. But a high-level law enforcement official briefed on the matter told CNN that after speaking to Reyes, law enforcement officials had determined he wasn't the letter's author. A handwriting sample Reyes provided didn't match that of the handwritten letter. Further, investigators suspect that Reyes was set up by someone hoping to see him deported before a separate robbery case. One person suspected of playing a role in the letters had made jail calls inquiring about specific addresses, including one that received the menacing note. See, people will try to dismiss every way they can. The evidence has come out, and that's developed even more since this report. On top of that, if you're in Noem's position, and which by the way, you're already seeing them double down on their just Democrat activists and whatever their stupid narratives always are, you realize that all you'd really have to do was take this a step further. Lay out your case. If you're claiming he did write it, then show more than an allegation in a piece of paper. Prove that's the reality. Because what the investigators are showing is that you can prove that people that have a clear motive to make this happen were calling and got the address of the places you sent it to. And the fact is that you can see based on multiple factors that he wasn't even capable, let alone wrote this letter. But it says in a press release, the Department of Homeland Security asserted that Reyes had written the letter. The agency also claimed that Reyes had, quote, entered the U.S. illegally at least 9 times. Now, the report that they put out claims that. I mean, it does seem to be the reality that he was in the country illegally. But the question becomes, like they made the case about Garcia that they grossly misrepresented, at what point was he applying? Was he coming here to flee violence? Or, it's also possible that he made that up. It doesn't change the legal reality of going through that process, which I get. There's an abuse there. But to pretend that's not the case without even fully knowing that is dishonest from every possible way. Bottom line, he was in the country legally based on that visa process, which I personally disagree with. The idea that we should allow this limbo state forever that does get taken advantage of. But I'm also honest enough to acknowledge that it is currently the law, so therefore we should engage with it until, what's the old saying, then vote it out, right? Go vote, go to politics and make sure you change that going forward. Well, how often that never happens, but the bottom line is they were lied to, or we were lied to by them. And another man's life was taken advantage of because Cristian either doesn't know how to do her job or was willing to lie about it. And it continues to expand. Fox News, State Department now reviewing all visa holders associated with Harvard, not just students. I mean, in what world does that even make sense? This is so obviously punitive. You're going after, and I'm not taking any side. I've pointed out all sorts of crazy things about Harvard, whether it's the woke left side of it or the crazy overlap with Charles Lieber and the different things they've done, or the overlap with Epstein. We see that's not stuff they want to get into because they're all wrapped into that too. The point here is that it's about trying to make this about the one conversation and the standoff between Trump and Harvard, and the idea that now they're just going, oh yeah, you don't want to just bend? Well, fine, then we're going to go after everybody. Without there even being a valid, logical reason to just go after. This is punitive. And they're going after anybody that's there that they disagree with who said something on it about Israel. They're not even hiding that anymore. And yet you have all these people screaming America first, free speech, as this government is actively suppressing people's free speech. Marco Rubio. The U.S. will begin revoking visas of Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. Okay, let me get this straight. A random Chinese kid who happens to be studying in a critical field will have his visa yanked. Why? I mean, is this McCarthyism again? I mean, guys, these people are tired. They're the same old regurgitation of the same things of the past. This is absurd. We've already been through this. But you get the screaming sycophants online right now that will pretend like this all makes sense, and you can read about a few of them right down there. Oh, and so if you want to be outraged about the hypocrisy, here's Rubio going, we're going to get rid of them just because they're Chinese and working on the wrong things. And we only, we want to get these people out of our country, right? Well, Mexican president demands the U.S. explain deals they just made with a terrorist cartel figure amid extradition push. It says, Sheinbaum, the president, said that U.S. authorities must explain why they have made plea deals with the members of a drug cartel that they themselves have designated as foreign terrorists. Well, guess what? If you're even barely paying attention, that's just Monday, guys. That's what this government has done its entire existence, working with other terrorist governments or working with the moderate rebels, or they work with the terrorist organizations. That's what they do. So the game they're playing about trying to get all the bad guys out as they clearly go after the people that are just there, well, seemingly not going after the worst people, it just shows you who they really are. And in this case, they're making a deal with the worst of the worst to be in this country, or they just brought in some. We just talked about that too. The family that made a deal with. But it says, we must emphasize something very important. The United States government recently issued a decree labeling some organized crime groups as terrorist organizations. They have repeatedly stated they do not negotiate with these groups. So they need to explain why, in these cases, agreements are being made. Yeah, because they're hypocrites, guys. Because they don't mean what they say. It's all about using narratives in the moment and getting emotionally driven people to react. Now, Jose Olivares says the Trump administration is trying to dismiss charges against a top MS-13 leader, Vladimir Antonio Arevalo Chavez, to deport him to El Salvador, according to records unsealed today. Now, it says Chavez was a key negotiator with Bukele's government He knows a lot about Bukule's pact with MS-13. See how much this continues to come out? I mean, this is just mud on their face every day. People that are still trying to pretend like what this administration is doing, again, don't hear this as one-sided. It's both sides. It's just your government. But some of them seem to think somehow this one's different than all the ones before it. But the ones that still seem to act like this is somehow the good direction. Guys, everywhere you look, they're working with the despots. They're working with the worst people in the world. And in this case, the whole claim about El Salvador and the libertarian future, this guy literally made a deal with the terrorist group that you claim you're fighting in order to make it look like crime had gone down. The U.S. government called that out before. Here's the report from Dropsite News. Secret Bukele deal lies behind Trump El Salvador deportations. And it's not just conjecture. Read it. It's provable. So this goes on to highlight that not only are they not going after criminals, but they're sending them back to a place where they can live without persecution. Or prosecution, excuse me. Shouldn't be surprising, though. Christian Zionism and Bukele's El Salvador. Hard to miss why. Of course, the new Trump administration and the technocratic Zionist coup of the United States is the way I see all of this. And let's overlap that with the Israeli genocide that's continuing to happen. Now, one thing I do think is interesting on the partisan overlap, too, is this just keeps happening. Whether it's Kristi Noem, whether it's Alex Jones and the Chi-Coms, whether it's Laura Loomer and the China overtaking this country, which we shouldn't dismiss. Of course, it's possible that China, like any other government, could be influencing, if not occupying this country, right? Obviously, except when these people, or except when you've never seen a more obvious example in your life where Israel's doing exactly that. But so right now, or even just, maybe you could just make a case that technocrats are taking over, right? That's my point. Palantir. But nope. June 1st. Kristi Noem comes out and says, China has infiltrated our country. Okay. And here's what this was the comment. Somebody says, China's infiltrated the country. Yes, because if you speak out against China, you will be silenced. Or wait, is that what's happening? I mean, it's like the old, I think it's attributed to Voltaire, right? To know who rules over you, look to you are not allowed to criticize. It's incredible to think that you could argue that they were so clearly being influenced to an alarming degree by the Israeli government. And I just simply said, hey, look over there. That's what they're all doing. Loomer and the rest, like every other day. Or even the interesting point to look back at how long Jones has been like the China, which is not something to dismiss, but how funny is now it just literally bumps up against the obvious, and they seem to keep ignoring it. That needs to show you something. And here's Jones and this is just funny to point out again, and I'll point out again as we go forward. This is May 9th, 1.2 million views. Alex Jones' prediction that the president would completely cut ties with Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah, that's aging like sour milk, isn't it? Well, I mean, certainly could happen tomorrow. I said at the time when I first talked about this, I can see a world in which he could be the scapegoat. That's not the same thing as saying that they've cut ties, because the bottom line is right now, that's not what happened. He said this because of a floated report about them distancing and not relying on U.S. aid. And that rapidly fell away within like 24 hours. And now we're right back to it's the same thing. Or like he said, the Ukraine war ended about 2 months ago, right? I guess that, or whatever it was. He did. He said, it's over. We did it. And now here it is, still continuing. He said, in this report, Jones exclusively reveals the backstory of what turned Trump against Netanyahu. Clearly, on May 9th, they needed you to think that. That's how I see it. Bottom line is that does not appear to be what's happening at all. They're still there and still blindly supporting Israel's agenda because that's what's going on. Now, interestingly enough, looking back to October 17th, 2023, when I said this, I did not say this because I was guessing. It was very apparent to me, and this was the Baptist hospital conversation. I simply said Israel already lost the information war. October 17th, 10 days after this whole thing started, post-October 7th, and it was very apparent to me that they had already completely fallen apart. I just think we're now just only really coming to terms with how obvious that is. I think it was obvious right back then. Just worth pointing out. And of course, stuff like this, where this Jacob Ben David Linker says, it's weird how everybody forgot about this, and then points to a story that was embarrassingly broke down within moments. And I mean, like, from everybody, even corporate media. Remember this one? Where they showed like the electronics down here and the weird floor ceilings that just didn't match any of the buildings they claim it came from, or the fact that you could literally prove that wasn't even where they said it was. I mean, and the point was directly beneath UNRWA. IDF uncovers secret Hamas data center. Oh, you mean the one that never actually materialized? Or the number of Al-Shifa hospital headquarters. I mean, it's just sad. One thing to the next, or it's a what was the list? There's a list. It's a calendar, or a book that turns out to be something they lied about, or they're claiming it's instructions for chemical weapons. Nope, that's a thing from Amazon. Like, lazy. At the beginning, I'm like, do they want you to see this stuff? I just think they're bad at this. But this guy's showing you that right now. Like this right here. They literally claimed that was a list of like terrorist activities until people who could actually read Hebrew or Arabic were like, that's the days of the week. It's what it is. You can check it with anybody. And yet they had the nerve to go, they're terrorist stuff. That's how dumb they think you are, or maybe just how dumb they are. Israelis in this context, what I'm talking about. But they'll do whatever they can to go, look over there, talk about China, look at these people. Stop paying attention to the obvious. Now, Mohammed Shihada and Jeremy Scahill made really excellent points about this that needs to be, this is getting missed. It's falling by the wayside because of a lot of stuff going on. But Jeremy Scahill says this, interesting, in Hamas's new proposal, and you can read about it right here, it reasserted language that Israel and Witkoff removed that says that Hamas would relinquish all governance and management of Gaza to an independent technical committee. Well, technocratic is what it said in the other point, the other documents of Palestinians. Israel and Witkoff paper didn't mention this at all. Interesting. And as Mohammed Shihada says, Netanyahu basically wants Hamas to stay in power in Gaza to use as pretext for genocide. Now, it's his opinion, but I agree. While Hamas has been keen to step down from government to end Israel's pretext for besieging and annihilating Gaza, this has been an ongoing dynamic for over a decade. In 2014, Hamas stepped down from the government to hand Gaza over to the PA. Then Netanyahu rushed to declare war on Gaza to kill that agreement and keep Hamas in power. I mean, it just never stops. And anybody with a brain, if you're being honest, this has been plain as daylight from the very beginning. For whatever reason, it's finally breaking through for people. But just in case you forgot, I'll play that clip of former members of the government telling you that that's what the point was, to fund Hamas in order to keep them divided. I think I still have that loaded up in here. No.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told, is on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash, probably more than $1.4 billion. By doing it, we increased the power of Hamas. We did everything in order to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and Palestinian Authority will control the West Bank, so they will fight each other.
Very clear. And you guys here, I'm sure, have seen that 1,000 times, not more than just me playing it. Or the Haaretz tweet saying that was the reality, and Netanyahu on record saying that is our strategy. It's just so lazy and frustrating how clear it all is. But the point, Netanyahu basically wants them to stay in power. So same thing, Jeremy Scahill pointing this out. Promise Lie says, genuinely losing my mind how this is not bigger news. I mean, we all know why it's not. They're all invested in this. Hamas is literally proposing to give up power in Gaza in a ceasefire proposal, and Israel and U.S. keep specifically rejecting that part. I mean, it's being covered by corporate media. It's not hard to find right now. This is how much the Zionists want an excuse to continue genocide. And here's what's funny about this. So as that's happening, here's what Mossad commentary writes on this today. Hamas is now at its lowest point ever in terms of control in Gaza. If Israel is persistent on the operation of Gideon's chariots and its mission, it may be less than a month that Hamas will be the thing of the past, as they're actively making sure that stays in, that they continue to maintain power. I mean, you just can't make this up. I mean, that's how clumsy this is. So we'll finish with what's going on in the Aid massacre as they're pretending they're trying to end this war. So again, let's highlight the fact that in that deal, they discussed the idea of a technocratic committee, which I think is just crazy. And as well as the fact that Israel, and this is on May 13th, seeks funding for plan, which I'm sure Palantir happily stepped up for, to require facial recognition in exchange for food in Gaza, which, by the way, is what they went on to do, as we'll highlight right here. Max Blumenthal broke this down. Mossad has been named, Mossad, if you can believe that, named by the Israeli lawmakers as the funder of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The GHF is the group that's running the whole aid operation, and it's Mossad and American mercenaries. It's hard to piece together why it ended up being a massacre. The weaponized aid organization is the linchpin of Israel's plan to ethnically cleanse northern Gaza by forcing the starving population into a concentration camp like hubs, which they use the word concentrated. Max adds, biometric concentration camps marketed as aid hubs, all run by U.S. mercenaries and paid by Israeli intelligence via a Swiss shell company founded by the biggest names in humanitarian aid, including the former CEO of World Central Kitchen, which at the time, despite them killing people in that mission too, it was called out that there was a weird overlap with that entity. But welcome to the privatized Gaza genocide. Unreal. Now here's what Mohammed Shihada had to say on this was the 28th of May, calling this out, that this was coming. Here's what he had to say.
Single person I spoke to in Gaza said one has to be completely insane, out of their minds, to step a foot in those heavily militarized concentration camps that Israel is setting up in Rafah, where you have to pass through numerous checkpoints with Israeli genocidal soldiers teaming around it, waiting to ambush whoever they want. And you have to pass through facial recognition technology, fingerprinting, different layers of screening and vetting with undisclosed criteria. And at the end of it, you have to literally walk from Beit Hanun, 41 kilometers to Rafah, to pick up a package that would weigh 20 to 40 kilos, and then 41 kilometers back under constant bombardment, thinking that you will make it back alive. Nobody in Gaza thinks that if you step a foot in those compounds, you will make it back home alive on your feet. Either you will be killed on the way, you will be kidnapped by the Israeli soldiers, you will be blackmailed into collaborating with Israel, or the food that you would get would be looted on the way. But then there is the other element of it that people are afraid about, the forcible expulsion. That all those hubs are established, 3 of them are established in Rafah. One of them is to be established to the south of the Netzarim corridor, where Israel would tell people the only way you can get food, leave your home, leave northern Gaza, and move to the borders with Egypt for the final phase of the genocide to be implemented, where Israel would push them a few hundred meters further into Egypt, into the Sinai Desert. Then there is the other element of basically using this as an ultimate tool of dictating who lives and who dies, because it's only 60% of Gaza that would receive this aid, according to the organization itself, according to Israel itself, only 60%, which means Israel would pick and choose who gets aid and who dies. It is like dystopian by every metric you choose. You're wielding it as a weapon to further the genocide, to debilitate the entire population, collectively punish them, while pretending to allow any food in, but you're practically not.
I mean, guys, this is no different than the last many times. But look, I mean, we just made the reference point of the pier. I mean, do we already forget how that went? They roll out a pier that cost all this money, and they delivered some menial, like a couple of crates that fed basically nobody. And then it turned out it was for a military operation where they executed people who were in beds in hospitals, all dressed up like Palestinians. And then the pier went away. I mean, it's just so transparent that was only about manipulation. And it's the same thing here. Or the flour massacre, which I'll point to in a second, which was yet another example of them manufacturing starvation and then taking advantage of desperation. This is just punishment. They're making these people suffer. And as Muhammad writes, my latest Israel's Hamas looting aid claim has been debunked by the Israeli military. U.S. officials, the UN, World Food Program, every major NGO. Yet the myth lives on for one reason: to cover up a genocide of starvation. And he's done amazing work on this. Here's one of these threads, and it's unreal how obvious all of this is. As he writes, conclusive evidence of Israel running the very criminal gangs looting aid in Gaza. Now, by the way, this is not even a new conversation. There's reports about this. Roberts talked about this, I made this point about the tunnels that went under from that Time magazine article, that they knew and used the reality of this to keep the argument that they need to keep the occupation or keep the military side of it. And they would use those tunnels themselves, or they would allow them to. It's very obvious. And it turns out that most of what they brought through those tunnels were toys and food and different things. And yes, sometimes weapons for the resistance. The bottom line, though, is Israel knew about that and used that. So here you can see, when you go through this yourself, we went over this the other day. I pointed to it. From Hamas footage, senior Abu Shabab gang leader is identified. Ghassan al-Dahani is the mercenary running the gang's operation on the ground. He survived this ambush and is believed to be still running the Israel-backed gang. In mid-April, exactly when this ambush was carried out, a Facebook group posted the names of 4 armed individuals that were killed in Rafah while conducting work. They were ex-officers of the PA security forces. Now, if you don't remember, this is really important. Oh, I thought that would pop up. Let's see. I wanted to get Robert's article on. There you go. He's done, I think, at least 3 different articles for TLAV about this topic, but this one's entitled Palestinian Authority Does Israel's Dirty Work. 1 killed in clashes. His overarching point is the Palestinian Authority has always been a construct. It is not Palestinian. It is an Israeli manipulation to kind of outsource the enforcement. So it doesn't look like they're doing it. It's a lot of different points. Very important to understand. So he says they are the ones seen killed in the Hamas video above. Now it says the IDF itself just admitted that Abu Shabab is the gang leader responsible for looting aid. They left out that he's doing so under full IDF protection, who allow him to operate this group of armed mercenaries in Rafah. The whole document is Israeli content. You can read it for yourself. I mean, the evidence is shocking. And again, this goes back a long way. These people are being identified. This one we already talked about. This guy that's out there directing traffic. And that they have overlaps with ISIS in different groups. I mean, these are radicalized people that Israel has been using funding, just like the U.S. government. Now, here is CNN's article. At least 26 people killed after Israeli forces opened fire near Gaza, a distribution center, health workers say. At least 26 people. Now, the number has gone up. I've seen 35. I've seen more. Have been killed and scores injured after Israeli forces opened fire on Sunday near a southern Gaza aid distribution center run by a controversial U.S.-backed foundation, according to Palestinian Red Crescent Society. Now, that's the Mossad-funded U.S.-backed terrorist organization, as that way it looks to me right now. Crowds of citizens headed to receive food aid from a site in the Rafah area when Israeli forces opened fire, according to the paramedics on the ground. The only medical professionals that were present in the area, this Red Crescent. More than 80 people were injured, logically shot. According to the Nasir Medical Complex in Khan Yunis, also in southern Gaza, excuse me, which confirmed the death of 26 people. CNN has reached out to the Israeli military for comment, as well as to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, so Mossad, which runs the site. The GHF is a private organization backed by Israel and the United States. It was sent up amid Israeli accusations that Hamas is stealing aid in Gaza and selling it for profit. Humanitarian organizations say there's no evidence of that. There's not. And Israel hasn't presented any evidence publicly. That's just insane that we're still there. United Nations aid agencies have criticized the GHF and their aid mechanism, saying it violates humanitarian principles and raises risks for Palestinians. And here we are. Like I said this before we got to the massacre. GHF is not screening Palestinians at aid distribution sites, it says. Whether you may want that or not, the point is, despite Israeli officials saying that additional security measures were a core reason why they needed the new group and the new program, and then didn't check anything. Like, it's just so transparent what they're trying to manufacture here. Criticism has been mounting against both Israel and the GHF after chaos broke out last week. We talked about that. While tens of thousands of starving Palestinians arrived at 2 new food distribution sites. And guess what? Shots were fired then, and they all ran away. It's not new what's happening. The game here, in my opinion, is to manufacture the illusion that they're animals. We're trying to help them, and they just want to kill everybody. And I don't think anyone's buying that, other than people that already believe that because they're either blinded by their own hatred or don't care about the truth. Aid was distributed without incident, according to the statement. Can you even believe that? So despite the universal coverage, they still put out a statement. They go, oh, it went great. Everything was fine. However, a mixed picture appears on the ground with claims of aid distributed believed to be inaccurate. So the argument is that aid didn't even really get distributed, but they sure as hell killed a lot of people. GHF also claims reports of deaths, mass injuries, and chaos at the site are false. It's just insane. They're fabricated, untrue. That's what Israel's own government put out. Well, here's some of that fake, untrue information. Oops, did I pull that down? So it just shows people, it says, eyewitnesses report that Rafah massacre occurred after Israeli drone loudspeakers instructed displaced Palestinians to head to the area to receive aid. Once they gathered, Israeli forces opened fire and shelled them, killing and injuring hundreds. Drop site news, 15 killed at the time they reported this, 50 injured, more went up. Israeli forces opened fire. Same thing we just reported. There's one other part that I was going to read. 3 sites have been set up in Gaza and Rafah in southern Gaza. According to the IDF's own estimates, 1 million Palestinians still reside there, which means they've killed over 1 million people. In a statement published by Facebook just hours ago before they posted this, the GHF said that on Saturday, June 1st, it will have only one active distribution site, which is the Tel Al Sultan site. All others will be closed. So they're driving people and they're hurting them. The statement continues, we invite only the residents of this area. Bottom line, it says the new site was established in the same neighborhood. I thought there was a point that I was going to pluck out of there. Anyway, the bottom line is just more information, more videos of these people being shot, and more ongoing follow-up on all this. Israel Exposed highlights this. Press News, same thing. Israel's trying to deceive the world and deny the Rafah aid massacre happened. And in these videos, I'll play one of these in a second. You can hear, the main thing to point out is that you can hear the Israeli automatic gunfire. There's nobody arguing that anybody else in the situation even has that capability. And so arguably the reality is that they're openly firing at a bunch of civilians. And there's aid workers that were there that saw it all, and they're still trying to lie about it. It says the exact moment U.S. mercenaries opened fire at groups of starving civilians, 30 people died. It looks like it's going up from there. Jeremy Scahill says some in Gaza are calling this the Witkoff massacre because of his sabotage of the fair ceasefire deal, and because the aid scam in the U.S. and Israel have imposed that they have imposed is proving correct that those who warned it was a lethal trap. Again, Muhammad Shiata was only one of them. They said you're going to get shot at and killed, and they show up and they get shot at and killed. That's what seems to continue to happen. Aaron Mate says the Israeli playbook: impose a starvation siege, establish a fake aid group, commit massacres after massacre. CNN report, and Assault Rod simply says, how depraved do you have to be to starve an entire population, lure and humiliate them with crumbs, and then shoot and kill them? Well, not the first time. You want to break this down? This one's from March 2nd. The Flower Massacre setup, false flag attempt exposed. I mean, and this was nailed to the ground. Their story changed 4 or 5 times, and every time it changed, it was trying to adapt to what the new information showed. That's what I mean by the reactive propaganda. They're desperate. They're trying to go, oh, well, here's why. It's like with Shireen Abu Akleh. Started out where they killed her, and then it turns out they didn't. Oh, well, it was a random, other, I forget what the other middle part was. Somebody else. Oh, no, it was a ricocheted bullet from the IDF. It wasn't on purpose. Oh, no, they did shoot her, but they thought she was somebody else. I'm not even making that up. Over the process of weeks, they just changed their story, and I have that included here, I think. Oh, I guess not. I'll include it since I mentioned it. And as Robert covered both times, the U.S. government actively helped cover this up. I'll include that for you. Now, another article we discussed, and this was the next day, March 5th, Gaza's Flower Massacre was only the beginning of famine that has just started. Ryan Grimm highlights what Israel said. Now, this is today. Imagine doing this with all the evidence you can see out there. I mean, this again, desperate is the word for this. They have no other option than just to go lies. It says, false reports have been spread in recent hours, including serious allegations against the IDF regarding fire towards Gazan residents, like they've never done that before. In the area of the Humanitarian Aid Distribution Center, they've done that before too. Findings from an initial inquiry indicate, right, so we investigated ourselves, and we indicate that the IDF did not fire at civilians while they were near or within the humanitarian aid distribution site, and that reports to this effect are false. So what are they saying? They were just outside the area? That's what I'm sure it'll get to if they had to push. The IDF is cooperating with the GHF and international aid organizations in order to enable the distribution of aid to Gaza residents and not to Hamas. You know, the thing that they can't prove ever happened and that everyone's calling them a liar for. IDF calls on the media to be cautious with information published by Hamas terrorist organizations. That's not what happened. See, that's the way they try to conflate it for those that want to blindly accept their narrative. There's video on the ground from individuals. There's aid workers, Red Crescent. It just can't keep pretending these things aren't happening. As it says right here, Red Cross. Mass shooting victims were at Israel's backed aid site. That's Red Cross. Different than Red Crescent. Doesn't matter. They don't care. They're going to lie because that's all they can do. Ryan Graham says this statement from the IDF about last night's massacre was also distributed to journalists. But in the version sent to reporters, it includes an off-the-record section that acknowledges the IDF did fire, quote, to prevent several suspects from approaching the troops. Interesting they chose to leave that part out, which matches witness descriptions. The statement was not sent to me directly by the IDF, and I never agreed to any OTR conditions with them, so I'm sharing the off-record portion here. Any journalist on the IDF press list can confirm this was included in the IDF statement. Here is that they left out of the posted site. Overnight, approximately 1 kilometer away from the aid distribution, which is why they said outside the area, and outside the operating hours, IDF troops acted to prevent several suspects from approaching the troops. During the activity, now here's what's disgusting about this. I'm going to show you the video right now, and you could look them up. They're everywhere. You're going to tell me that this is, there are hundreds, if not more, people all around this area, and this was in the process, and they're going to try to pretend that there's off hour. It's just lazy. Everyone can see what this is. During the activity, warning shots were fired towards several suspects who advanced toward the troops. There is no connection between this incident and the false claims. You mean, like, aside from the fact that last week you did the same thing, or the Flower Massacre, or 100 other examples where you shot at them openly and then bragged about it online? Nah, that's not even close. Muhammad says, don't believe your lying eyes. Believe the terrorist psycho who brags, I've killed a lot of Arabs in my life, and there's no problem with that. That's Naftali Bennett. He says, the report is simply untrue. Israeli tanks did not open fire on civilians at the shelling or near the aid center. 26 dead after tanks opened fire near Gaza. That's BBC, CNN, same thing. Now, I'm not saying because they reported it makes it true, but even the mainstream media is acknowledging what everyone else can prove because that has shifted. We can tell. Now, here's the clip, one of the many where you can hear. Oh, actually, did I forget to grab that? Oh, there it is.
Ya Allah. Ya Allah, انفتح. Ya Allah.
And realize how continuous the firing. That's not warning off some people. That's just continuing, and that's what we're told. They were firing openly. That's what 30 plus people were killed. So what he reports, don't believe your lying eyes. This piercing noise of Israeli machine guns emptied in a hungry crowd is only happening in your head. Trust the Israeli government that lied about the ambulance men, Shifa Hospital, Flower Massacre, beheaded babies, looting gangs, Hamad Hospital, Hind Rajab, the terror calendar at Red Saudi Hospital, World Central Kitchen workers, babies in ovens, white phosphorus, deliberately starving Gazans. Sinwar surrounded himself with 20 hostages in a tunnel. All these are lies, by the way, provable lies. Gassing hostages. Ali Hospital, killing women and children with white flags, mass raping Palestinians, non-existent tunnels under graveyards, Nasir Hospital, Hassoum Abu Safia, mass graves, snipers targeting kids in the head, providing protection to criminal gangs to loot aid, wiping out Gaza, who refused to collapse the ceasefire, blowing up Gazans fleeing south, Kamal Adwan Hospital, claiming dead Gaza children are dolls, creating safe zones. The general's plan, how many Hamas militants were killed, Red Crescent taking part in October 7th, killed journalists, Hamas militants, Muhammad Abu Salmaya, the Indonesian hospital, UNRWA, the Adwa hospital, or the Auda hospital, killing women sheltering at a church, bombing a church, destroying every single Gazan university, the Turkish cancer hospital, Hamas hiding giant stockpiles of fuel in Rafah, finding active smuggling tunnels in Rafah, hostages returning pregnant, who killed Yossi Sharabi. That was the Bibas overlap. Itia Shearsky, or the names I'm mispronouncing. The bottom line is every single one of these things are lies. The obvious ones you already know: beheaded babies, babies in an oven, rape. They're all going to come back pregnant. I mean, every single one of these. But yeah, but they're telling you the truth this time. Rami Abdul from the Euromed Human Rights Group. The Israeli spokesperson published a video suggesting Israel wasn't responsible for the massacre of starving civilians near the American food distribution point in Rafah in southern Gaza. But the video backfired and turned into a scandal. The footage actually showed a theft operation in Khan Yunis, not Rafah, by gangs backed by Israel. Civilians tried to retrieve some of the stolen aid while the gang, operating under Israeli drone surveillance, fired into the air without injuring anyone. For the record, Israeli targets any attempt to secure aid. Now, there's so many points to make with this. Isn't this hilarious? So over here, this is on June 1st. The point is that the narrative is evolving, right? So they come out and they go, no, it was outside the area and it was off hours. Except they put this out first, which shows that, remember, this is wrong. They lied about this. The reason, we'll start with this. The reason I think they put this out is because it appears as if there are shots being fired by people that they want to claim as Hamas. Only problem is it's not where they say this. This is Khan Yunis, not Rafah. So that's the first point. So but they used it because they thought it would work. That's the kind of dumb things they try to do. What's funny though, didn't they just tell you it was off hours? And then you can see the video where it shows you that it's dusk. So they don't care that they think you're too dumb to go, but wait, you just said it was after hours. But here's the video they claim is what it was, and it's during the day. Then it gets caught for being in the wrong area, and they go, okay, we'll just move aside. Like, they literally will just lie after lie after lie, which again is actually what you've heard 100 times over, which we should just play again since it's funny, because the reality is, do I even have it in there? It just never stops how clearly these people will just lie about anything nonstop, no matter what. But it's right in front of you. You can't have both things true at the same time. But they don't care, because this might trick some people over here and that one might trick some people over there. Because the only people they're tricking are either too dumb to know they're being lied to or willing to go along with whatever Zionists say. I think they know that by now. Ryan Grimm says even more footage of the massacre that the IDF claims didn't happen. It's horrifying, guys. Children crawling away. They're shooting openly at people trying to get aid right in the middle of the day. So here's the reality. This is not after hours. Seeing as how this is well before the other clip with gunfire over their heads or at them when it's dark. This is how this always goes. And I guarantee, well, I shouldn't guarantee you, but most likely tomorrow, they'll have a new adaptation to the narrative they claim didn't change, but make sense of the parts that now make them look like they're wrong. And your Witkoffs and Millers and the rest will all happily toe the line. Now, Gaza is starving, has been for a very long time. The IPC and the rest have been saying this forever. 1 million plus people in famine conditions. Now, one of the reasons people argue that this kind of shifted is because there's been images of all these starving children that have circulated the globe. And this is what they're showing you right here. At least some of the pictures. And I have a whole bunch of them that's not, I mean, I don't need to shock you with a bunch of images of dead children, scary, starving people to hopefully imprint on you that it's happening. But we've done that over this entire process. It's not today. But entire article about how the world is acknowledging the starvation. Here's what Lower Luma put out on April 21st. I genuinely have zero compassion or sympathy for Gaza. Not Hamas, all of Gaza. I feel nothing for them. Many people are just like me. Maybe that's what makes her sleep at night, if that's even possible. But they are afraid to say it. Yeah, if they are, then they're disgusting just like you. And she says, be proud. I'm very proud. Be proud of who you are and take pride in not having sympathy for bloodthirsty Hamas terrorists and their supporters who cry out in pain as they strike you. I can't even believe that. We are on the right side of history, she says. I mean, it's just, that seems like a desperate, shrill claim in hopes that people will pretend that's the case. I mean, she must know by now that that's not the prevailing narrative right now. And she goes, people who support Gaza will not be remembered kindly in history. Wow. Now, this is what's so funny. And they know this, to me, this is what shows you that she is being directed by something. The idea that they cry out in pain as they strike you is a classically alleged narrative against Jewish people, which to me is really just a Zionist overlap, but you could take it for whatever you want. That's an argument of a claim of what Jews do to other people. Now, that's not my mindset. But my point is, it's one of these claims or tropes that's been used in the past that she's now recycling back against the other side. That's not by accident. Or the concentration camp use, or all the different things they're slowly leaning into. Aside from the obvious, that this has got to be one of the most soulless, lacking of compassion, foul, vile people I've ever seen in my life. How in the world do you think that makes sense? It's disgusting that anybody can look at that and go, yeah, like, at the very least, this is why it's a perfect example of defending the free speech right of even the most vile, hateful, and ignorant people on the internet. If you don't fight for the worst of speech, you do not believe in free speech. And we have the right to call out such disgustingly foul people. The point is, if that wasn't allowed to be stated out publicly, they would be saying it in some dark corner to people that all think that's what they should be. The reality is this needs to be public so we can acknowledge what a disgusting person she is. and what she's driving, what she, like there's all these disgusting, like the Tates of the world that are convincing generations to think that this is acceptable behavior. Now, I don't mean in the sense that you can act and do whatever you want, but in the sense that this is moral, right? This is sound. It's integrity. It's what people should be doing, the right side of history. Yeah. Keep telling yourself that. As I think it was Nocturne, or what's that guy's, I forget his account. He just simply said, this will age like sour milk. That's why I used that earlier. There it is. Give him a shout out for that, since I said that earlier. It was in my mind. Here's what he posted this. This will age like sour milk. And I think he's right. I mean, I think I'm of the mind that most people think that's disgusting. Even if they agree with like the side she's on, we're like, yeah, but you're like, what you did there is gross. Like you're talking about starving children. You're talking about an entire civilization that even you tried to pretend weren't all guilty when this first started. Now suddenly they're all a bunch of monsters. Well, that's the whole thing we've been telling you, that's these people, Zionists like her, are the worst people on the planet. They are actively committing a genocide and telling you what they're doing is for your best interest. It's the worst of the worst. And on top of that, Lula says, hey, Ryan, your comment does not show up under the post, because I did post something. I simply just posted this image of a dying child that she seems to not care about. That was simply, this is Dr. Rosie, British plastic surgeon volunteering in Gaza, sharing a heartbreaking testimony in the pediatric ward of an innocent child that was bombed by Israel and has burns and pain. It's literally barely surviving. But according to Laura Loomer, that we don't care about that disgusting Hamas supporter, right, Laura? My point was I posted that just to give some kind of example, and guess what? Twitter's making sure you can't see it, because that's how that works. And here is what Laura is okay with. This is what she thinks. She wants you to pretend is acceptable, that this is only evil Hamas supporters as opposed to a random 13-year-old child who's being tortured in Israeli prisons. Look at that. Burn marks, bruises. I mean, guys, that's insane. And this is what Israel did to him while in detention for nothing. He wasn't charged with the crime. These are people being arrested. It says 7 months, and they let him go. So was he a terrorist or clearly not? So they just tortured a Palestinian child because that's what they do. I mean, do we even need to debate that anymore? They arguing about why they should be raping these people on live TV, and people like Laura cheer it on. My God. That's the reality. And Patrick Henningsen says, this is what the Israelis do to child hostages they abduct. And then apparently let go after 7 months with no charge because they're not criminals. That's what they do to not criminals. Or really they do to anybody Palestinian, regardless of their crimes. That's the reality of it. Haaretz, happily showing you the truth. As anyone has been there knows, said Tiaman is a sadistic torture camp. So accusing that which you are guilty all the time. Solomon Ahmed points out that Israeli individuals, and this one is oh, you know what? I forgot to grab that one. This is the one that you can read from Arsen Ostrovsky, the fake human rights lawyer, as I always call him. But this point is from another. I wanted to look up who it was, but so he's saying Israeli calls for the death of Greta Thunberg and Liam Cunningham. It says, we have one-time opportunity to drown Greta, and I hope we don't intend to miss. So here, just to make sure you don't miss that is what's happening. Now, regardless of your thoughts on Greta Thunberg, if you're that simple that you're still jumping at the shadow of the woke dynamic, which we should care about, but realize that has nothing to do with whether they're trying to kill her for reasons that have nothing to do with woke politics. Just my point is I'm so tired of having to defend back against people who go, oh, Greta's a woke. Who cares about that in this context? The bottom line is she seems to be played by the establishment because clearly she was on their side. She's danced all over the place. But it does seem at least she appears to be kind of jumping at what she thinks is important, whatever. It's sort of like as they grow up, they get used as children. I'll question her like anybody else entirely because of that. But the point is, she's on one of these freedom flotillas. Just like the many we've shown you with like Joe Meters, for example, from the USS Liberty, who got arrested as an American citizen and imprisoned for months when the US government didn't care, or the fact that they just attacked innocent people in international waters and almost killed some of them just because they're trying to bring aid to Gaza. That's a crime. Nobody cared. Now we have another example. Madeleine sails to Gaza today with her 12 humanitarian and as much life-saving aid as she can carry, including baby formula, medical supplies. She departs from Europe, territorial waters, sailing entirely through international waters into Palestinian waters off Gaza. I believe she's on a TV show, right? Unarmed and nonviolent, Madeleine poses no threat. She sails in full accordance with international law. Any attack or interference will be deliberate, unlawful assault on civilians, which they do every time. They know they're putting their lives at risk when they do this. The point is, Mel says, oh, look, an Israeli, in fact, tied to the government, calling for the murder of an unarmed woman because she's trying to feed starving children. Here's what Arsen Ostrovsky said. This is how brazen and vicious, maniacal these people are. He says, oh, look, the little jihadi group, Greta Thunberg, why, because she supports Palestine, is trying to get into Gaza to show solidarity with Hamas. No, with Palestine. But see, they can't even write a sentence without being dishonest. And he says, it would be so sad if something were to happen to her flotilla, ... I mean, even if you agree with the sentiment, even if you hate her to the point where you think she should be killed, can we not acknowledge how insane that is for this guy to float this idea like it's like we're all going to laugh along with him? Like, yeah, kill her. I mean, my God, it's like the pager discussion. Here, take a pager. They know what they're doing. These people are deranged. Why do you think it's acceptable to float the idea of trying to kill somebody like that because she's doing something you don't like? I just can't even understand where we are if this is what the prevailing sentiment is today. I don't believe that. So we'll see what happens. I'm willing to bet you, like every other flotilla, that they will attack that. Now, lastly, a few points as we're going to get into more in an upcoming show. You might have seen this. Israel's now approved, this is on the 29th, the biggest West Bank settlement expansion in over 30 years. That's a crime no matter where you look. The only deviation was Pompeo acting like it wasn't inconsistent with the law, never saying it was. Like it's just a lazy sidestep. Today, in the same conversation, it's illegal. This is illegal. No way around it from every possible angle. The point is not to forget that that's what Trump promised Israel when he took the money from the oligarchs, $200 million. And the point is he would give them West Bank annexation. Trump, desperate for Miriam Adelson's cash. Her condition, West Bank annexation. So just to compare them next to each other. Rampant lawlessness of the U.S. government, all of it, continues. If only we could move beyond the childish binary game called the two-party illusion, the primary block to actual positive change in this country. Instead, the government continues to sell out to the highest bidder or blackmailer. I mean, it's just not hard to see how this goes. You know, how it's going, how it started, how it's going. Very clear. Joe points out the overlap of Syria, because that's also involved with both the U.S. and Israeli foreign policy. He said, I see the great Syrian revolution is coming along nicely. Internal massacres against religious and ethnic minorities, selling off what little industry it has to the Gulf states and the United States, losing more territory and now wanting to collaborate with Israel. What a farce. Which, by the way, those of us paying attention, we're telling you that's where it was already going. As it says, the Syrian president, when asked about the relationship with Israel, says, we have common enemies and we can play a major role in the regional security. Great. So like we told you, that's the narrative. This is just one more extension of this occupation dynamic. And it's the same as Ukraine, by the way. If you remember this. Oh, big Israel is what it was. Zelensky from Ukraine. Wants Ukraine to be a big Israel. I mean, how do we miss these overlaps? It's obvious what this all comes back to. This is the expansion. This is the Greater Israel Project. The U.S. government facilitating that, waging wars for a foreign country at your expense. And now Syria, are we really not going to acknowledge this at any point? You know, that these were Al-Qaeda, that they spent, I mean, where are all the military personnel out there that thought they were fighting Al-Qaeda? And now the U.S. government, even in Syria in particular, and now the very government, whether left or right, both of them, all of them, just go, oh, now Syria's good now. We'll take the bounty off your head, and now you're the good guy. Like they've done in every city, like with Saddam, like with Osama bin Laden. The boogeyman of today is the ally of the U.S. moments before. That's how this tends to go. It's just wild. Now, Israel takes more territory. They're building bases. They're occupying more. They are literally taking over this area. So you, military personnel, you fought and sacrificed so Israel could take Syria? Stand up. Now, Trump says new Iran deal must allow U.S. to blow up whatever we want. That's how dumb this is getting. That's actually what he said. I mean, so here we are at a point now where you're going to make a deal with a group that knows that you don't have anything sacred, that the reason the last deal fell apart was because of Donald Trump and his administration. And so now we make another deal where they can just do whatever they want. They can bomb things in Iran, and that's okay. I mean, who in the world is ever going to agree with that? But I think that's the design. It's meant to create a circumstance where it appears that Iran is the one that doesn't want to comply, just like the game they play with Hamas. But we know how this goes. They lie to you every time. And that's why we're getting stuff like this. As Patrick points out, Israel and the neocons are now manipulating the International Atomic Energy Agency's intel to fabricate a case for preemptive nuclear strikes against Iran. It's 2003 all over again. And this is from the president of Israel, saying the IAEA today issued a damning, unprecedented report exposing Iran's true goal. Well, not really. That's the way they're framing this. But what it comes down to is this report. David Albright says, we have much more to say about the report. And you can read through all of this. The bottom line is the percentages. AIPAC, of course, the totally non-Israeli entity, says Iran now has 408.6 kilograms of uranium enriched up to 60%. This is enough for more than 10 nuclear weapons if further enriched to 90%, which is very far away. Iran has no civil reason to make this 60% material. Well, that's not inaccurate, but you know this if you follow this show. He says Iran cannot be trusted. Iran must dismantle its nuclear program. You know, so again, the reality is that every country has a right to any both nuclear weapon and civilian program. That's the international reality. They don't get to dictate individual countries that don't. Israel does the same thing. Now, aside from that point, which is just the static reality, the idea that the most untrustworthy, dishonest, caught lying every 10 seconds government, whichever one you want to take for that, Israel or the United States, is going to say that that one's the most dishonest. A group that has not invaded any other countries, that is not, I mean, what are we talking about here? It's all mirrors and shadows about what they're doing behind the scenes. And it's certainly possible. I wouldn't deny any of it. But even that, if you're going to say that everything they've ever said about Iran is true, that pales in comparison to what you can prove the U.S. alone or Israel alone have done. But they're the boogeyman. It's going back to Operation Ajax and the regime change of that country, which turned it into a despotic run by the Shah that only made it good for the oligarchs of the West. I mean, it's never hard to see how dishonest these people are. Now, back to the point. The reality is, as you remember, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran deal, was a deal that allowed the civilian production of uranium for civilian purposes, which arguably is the only thing Iran has ever done. No one's ever proved otherwise. They make a lot of claims, and Israel's been telling you they're 30 seconds away from a bomb for 20 years. So realize they made that agreement because they'll tell you that it's a religious violation for them to do that. They could be lying, of course. And every single time this comes to pass, they put forward the offer that we will make a nuclear-free Middle East. Every country will sign on except Israel. And they say, look, if everyone agrees to get rid of all their nuclear power, well, we will do it too. And of course, you could argue they're lying, but guess what? Israel says never going to happen, even though we don't have any, of course. And then the U.S. goes along with that, and they blame Iran. That's every single time. At the very least, you should be considering that they may not be lying, and Israel's the one that's been manufacturing lies like they tend to do. But aside from all of that, the reality here, guys, is that what we're talking about is the JCPOA, and that having two different articles. I think it was 26 and 36. I remember correctly. I could be wrong. The point was, in that, they made very clear, if the U.S. or really any entity should do what they eventually did, which was unilaterally pull out of the deal, they then were legally within the deal allowed to do this. To this very day, they can increase the enrichment until they come back to that deal. Now, that deal has long since been gone. The bottom line, though, is that this was only created because of Trump's administration and their actions, just the U.S. government, which then was used. They wanted that to happen so they can go, see, they're going against the deal. Well, they didn't. The deal, even still in place, if you want to argue that, is allowing that they were allowed to enrich uranium until that went back in place. And so it's just insane to argue that this is anybody else's fault other than the U.S. government. But that's the whole way this is manufactured. Now, to the point of today, The argument that they somehow have continued to seek these weapons and Netanyahu would tell you that they're moments away is ridiculous on its face with them citing those numbers. It's not there. And 60% is a long way off from 90%. And especially if you want to tell you they've been working on this for what, a decade, and that's where they are? I don't think that's the reality. The bottom line is getting it to 90% enrichment is the step to then need to make the material, to make the bombs to be used. They're not even there yet. So I just think it's insane for them to always be hyping this as the 30 seconds away timer when you literally know that Israel has nuclear weapons. They have an option called the Samson option, which even Seymour Hersh wrote about, which says that should they believe they're going to fall, they will send nuclear weapons against everybody, generally speaking. And yet we're making this. I mean, it just seems absurd. What they're trying to do is manufacture the consent for an attack on Iran. They've been doing it for a very long time. There's nothing new here happening. Now, one of the things you can consider, by the way, which is a valid point, is that because of all this pressure, they'll drive them in some way or some factions in the government to actually decide to do it, which still, to the first point, would be their legal right. The only reason the people have this whole thing is they are Iran, evil, terrorists, because they say that. Again, compare it to even what you can prove, and there's a lot more than that Israel has done, what the U.S. has done, and compare that to even what they claim Iran has done, most of which is false. It's shocking how obvious it is the one side is committing the worst atrocities in the world, and the other side is being taken advantage of. That's not good guy, bad guy. It's just objective what the U.S. and the Israel have been doing for the longest time. Guys, they're quite literally committing a genocide while they accuse Iran of being the bad guy. Now, here's Insurrection Barbie, who, by the way, is just still doing her Zionist pro-Israel thing. It's, and even conservatives, like pretty high-level people on the Republican side, have started to identify that this account feels like some kind of Zionist bot account. You can decide for yourself. It's propaganda, that's for sure. And she says, poll, 57% of Americans favor military action to stop Iran from going nuclear. That's Breitbart, of course. I just had to laugh out loud when I read that. Anything's possible. What I think is hilarious is that you can look back at just about any poll going back decades, and every single time they get a major poll, which we shouldn't trust polls anyway, but they come back every time. Most Americans do not want more war, period. I mean, every single time. That's why they have to manufacture us to decide why it's necessary, even though we shouldn't, and blah, blah, blah. The whole reluctant hero shtick, right? So if we're going to try to pretend that somehow 57% just randomly now, based on what, want this war, even though that's never the case, I find that impossible to believe. On top of that, many parts of this conversation understand that they're being lied to about this, that Israel's been cartoonishly doing these things for the longest time. I don't buy that. My point is, this is them trying to manufacture consent for what they are doing, which is Israel's war, and that the U.S. will be the one to fight it. Which, by the way, has always been the plan, which we will end with. Netanyahu has been maliciously influencing the U.S. government for decades, all while pushing for Americans to die for the Zionist agenda. None of these wars have been in the interest of the Americans. So we'll end with that. Thank you for tuning in today. I just really think, you tell me what you think. Reach out to me, send me something, comment. Where do you place all this? How clear is it to you? Do you think the majority is obvious? Do you think that it's obvious to the rest of the world that Israel is the culprit in all of this? I do. I think it is one of the most obvious things in the conversation, and that the best they can do is maintain the illusion that not everybody agrees and that you're the one that doesn't see it, sort of like they did during COVID-19, and we know they were lying about that. It's never in the establishment, in the authority, power, the power's interest to admit that they've lost control. Never will they come out and say that. So at least stand back and consider that if and when and should that be the case, then they would lie about it, right? So maybe that's what's going on. Worth considering at the very least. But help me get this information out. Share this. Get it in front of people, guys. I'm seeing a breakthrough on the conservative side, or more so even the Republican side of this, that are just suddenly going, wow, okay, this is obviously not what I want. Even though they're still very much on one side of the partisan, this is a stretch too far. So help me reach out. Thank you all for being here. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
If you take away the Soviet Union and its chief proxy, the PLO, international terrorism would collapse.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. Obviously, we'd like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how do it...
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
The answer is categorically yes. The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. But a third nation, by the way, is Libya as well. Libya is trying very rapidly to build an atomic bomb capability. So you have here now three nations.
All stand together to stop Iran's march of conquest, subjugation, and terror. I know that no matter on which side of the aisle you sit, you stand with Israel.
Let me preface these remarks with I never, ever believe Israeli figures.